Swati and I welcome you all to Edureka's YouTube channel. At Edureka, we provide online training on the most trending technologies with world's best instructors and 24/7 support. Today, I'm here to give you a complete overview on React.js course. React, as you might know, is a front-end library developed by Facebook. It was released in the year of 2013 and since then, it has continued to dominate the world of front-end development. Thus, we have curated this course in such a way that everything that you need to know about React.js has been categorized into several modules. Module 1 talks about what exactly is React.js. In Module 2, you will see the various aspects of React. In Module 3, you will see what is a virtual DOM. In Module 4, you will see the advantages of using React.js. In Module 5, we will see the applications of React.js in today's market. In Module 6, you will learn how to install React.js in your system. In Module 7, you will be learning about various fundamental concepts of React.js such as React component, its lifecycle, state, props, and many more. In Module 8, you will see how to integrate a state management library called Redux with React.js application. In Module 9, you will be given a brief overview of React Router. Finally, in the 10th module, you will be working on an end-to-end project. So that was all about today's offering. This session will be further continued by Mr. Vipul Jain. A quick suggestion would be to do subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated. Over to you, Vipul.
Hello everyone, my name is Vipul Jain. I have 10 years of experience in web development, which includes experience on React.js, AngularJS, and many other web technologies. So in this complete video course series, I will be starting from the basic components, React components, props, state, and then moving towards the advanced React.js topics, which includes Flux and Redux. So let's get started. So before moving to React.js and talking about what is React.js, let's talk about some of the differences between ES5 and ES6 standards. So what are these ES5 and ES6? These are basically the JavaScript standards. And since world is moving towards modern web development, we will be talking about more about ES6 as compared to ES5. So let's talk about the differences. So the first difference, ES5 calls React.createClass with an object, and ES6, it uses class which extends from React.component. But basically React.component, internally it calls React.createClass only. If I talk about ES5, that create class accepts an initial state function that is always called once when the component is mounted. But in case of ES6 class, in ES6 class, we have a constructor in state. So after calling the super keyword, first we will call the constructor and then the super. In the super, it sets the state directly. The most important thing when it comes to difference between ES5 and ES6 is the binding of functions. So when I talk about binding of functions in create class, that is React.createClass in ES5, it was very easy because every property that a function is automatically bound is by React. But in binding, if I talk about in ES6, it's a little trickier, a little complex because functions are not auto-bound. You have to bound them manually, and the best place to do it is inside the constructor. With create class, you can define the prop types and default props as properties on the object. But with ES6 class, these becomes properties of the class itself. So these are the basic differences between ES5 and ES6 classes or the JavaScript standard. And now let's talk about the syntax differences. So if you can see on the screen on the left hand side, I'm creating a constant called context React.createClass, having a render method and a return statement. But in ES6 class, we use a constructor where we need to call the super to pass the props to the React component. We now create a class which extends from React.component instead of accessing the React.createClass directly. So these are some of the syntax differences between ES5 and ES6. Now ES5 and ES6, prop types and get default props. So what are these prop types and get default props? So in the ES5 version, we used to have React.createClass version. The prop types property is an object. So you can see here get default props and the prop types. So this is an object in which we can declare the type of each prop. But in ES6, because ES6 uses prop types again as a property on the actual class. So our class name is context. So we are using the prop types and default props as a property on the actual class instead of a property as a part of the create class definition, which was there in ES5. Now, how you bind the context in ES6? So you bind the context of any function or any event in line. So as you can see here, that there is a class which extends from React.component, because this is a syntax which is used in ES6. Then we have a constructor and props in the super keyword. If you see here, div on click equal to this dot handle click dot bind. So the context is binded inline in ES6 standard. Now in ES6 standard, you have to bind the context inside the constructor, as we saw in the previous example. So if there is a div which has an on click event called this dot handle click, so this dot handle click is binded inside the context, that is the inside of the class which extends from React.component. Now, what are the advantages of ES6 over ES5? So in ES6, you can create promises, you can create classes. The traditional functions have been replaced by arrow functions, so you can create arrow functions now. There is a concept of blocks, scoping, and modules. So these are some of the advantages of JavaScript ES6 standard. And going forward in this complete video series, I will be talking about the class components only. Those are ES6 standards. So let's get started now. What is React.js? So we'll talk about what is React.js now. So React, if I talk about, is an open source JavaScript library. As you can see on the screen, it's a JavaScript library. So I say it's an open source JavaScript library for, you can say, creating rich user interfaces that run in user web browser. It is developed by Facebook, it is open source, and it is used to develop interactive user interfaces. React focuses solely on providing rendering and event handling functionality. Rendering is the conversion of data that describes the state of the user interface into DOM, or you can say into the DOM objects that web browser can use to produce a user interface that the user can see and interact with. Now, if I talk about what is React.js, so React.js uses JSX to write the code, and it uses the concept of virtual DOM. The virtual DOM is a JavaScript object model that React uses to calculate the user interface changes. So if I talk about React.js, as I said, it uses JSX for writing the code, which is basically the template syntax like HTML, but provides also full power of JavaScript as well. So JSX, we can say it's a combination of JavaScript and HTML. Now, aspects of React.js. There are three important aspects of React.js we will talk about. First is the virtual DOM, second is the data binding, and third is the server-side rendering. But before that, if I talk about the architecture of a React.js application, any React.js application is composed of a set of components. So it includes n number of components, and the inputs to these components are the properties, which are referred to as props and state. And this complete architecture of components, props, and state, we will be talking about in the later slides. So let's talk about what are the different aspects of React.js. Now, there are few things you should know in advance before you start playing around with React. So if you have never used JavaScript or the DOM at all before, for example, so I will suggest that please get familiar with those concepts before trying to tackle or play around with React.js. So if I say what are the prerequisites to play around with React.js, so you should have familiarity with HTML and CSS. You should have basic knowledge of JavaScript and programming. You should have basic understanding of DOM. DOM stands for Document Object Model. Then you should have familiarity with ES6 standards, which we talked about. So you have to know ES6 syntax, semantics, and features. And then finally, you have to know what is Node.js and how NPM is installed globally. So these are some of the prerequisites I talked about to start with React.js. So let's talk about virtual DOM now. This is the first aspect we want to know about React.js. So let's talk about the problem first. What is the problem? So DAM manipulation is the heart of modern interactive web. But unfortunately, it is also a lot slower than most JavaScript operations. So when you write in JavaScript document.getElement by ID, this is the ID of the element dot inner HTML equal to some value. Now what happens actually behind the scenes? What happens is that browser need to parse this HTML. It removes the child element, updates the DOM value with the new value. Then there is a complete recalculation of the CSS for the parent and child for the complete tree. And then the layout gets updated. So that is each element exact coordinates on the screen. And then finally, there is a complete traversal of the tree or the render tree, and then it gets displayed on the browser. Now what happens, as you can see on the point number 4, this is very much heavy. That is recalculating of the CSS and change layouts, because they uses a complex algorithm. They affect, and finally they affect the performance of the application, and as well as updating the DOM properties. It's very complex. Now here we are talking about only one change. Now let's say, suppose if you want to update the DOM, document object model, 10 times directly, then all the above 6 steps which I have talked about, they will run one by one, and they will update the DOM algorithms, which will take whole lot of time to update all the DOM values. That is why we say that real DOM is always slower than the virtual DOM. Please remember, virtual DOM is an aspect, or you can say concept, which is introduced by React.js. Now this slowness of the application can be made worse by the fact that most JavaScript frameworks update the DOM much more than they have to. For example, let's say that you have a list that contains 10 items, for example. So you check off the first item. Now most of the JavaScript framework would rebuild the entire list, that is the complete 10 list. That's 10 times more work than necessary. So only one item is changed, but the remaining 9 gets rebuilt again and again exactly how they were before. So rebuilding a list is no big deal to a web browser. But modern websites can use huge amount of DOM manipulation. Inefficient updating has become now a serious problem. So what happens when you try to update the DOM in React? The reconciliation process. So what happens is that the entire virtual DOM gets updated. The virtual DOM gets compared to what it looked like before, and now you have updated it. So React figures out the difference, or which objects have changed. Only those changed objects get updated on the real DOM. And then the changes on the real DOM, they cause the screen to change. So I can say that in React, for every DOM object, there is a corresponding virtual DOM object. So like any actual DOM, virtual DOM, you can say it's a node tree that lists the elements and their attributes and content as objects and their properties to directly change what is there on the screen. Manipulating the DOM is a slow process, but manipulating the virtual DOM is a very fast process, or you can say it's much faster, because nothing gets drawn on screen. It's just like manipulating the virtual DOM as editing a blueprint as opposed to moving the rooms in an actual house. If you can see that on the screen in the given tree, the red one are the ones which have been changed, and they have only been patched to the real DOM instead of the complete tree. So that is the power of a real DOM, you can say. Now the important thing, that how does React uses virtual DOM? It's very important. So as I said that in React, every UI piece is a component, and each component has a state. So React follows the observable pattern and listens for state changes. And whenever there is a change, it has been updated in the virtual DOM, which gets reflected to the real DOM. So in summary, what I can say, that what happens when you try to update the DOM in React. So what happens that the complete virtual DOM gets updated. The virtual DOM gets compared to what it looked like before you updated it. And then it reflects the changes on the real DOM, which causes the screen to change. That is the concept of a virtual DOM. Now let's talk about another aspect of React.js, which is data binding. So React.js follows, very important to learn, that React.js follows unidirectional flow of data, or one-way data binding, as compared to other frameworks which supports two-way data binding. So in React.js, throughout the application, the data flows in a single direction, which gives us a better control over the application. So as you can see here, that data flows from view to action. From action, it flows to dispatcher. On dispatcher, multiple actions can work, and from dispatcher, it goes to store. So React apps are organized as a series of nested components. These components are functional in nature, that is, they receive information through arguments. Now, if I talk about this one-way data binding or unidirectional data flow, so Flux, I want to talk about little bit about here, that Flux is a new kind of architecture that Facebook uses when it works with React. Flux is more of a pattern than a framework, and it has 4 main components you can see on the screen. The one component is dispatcher. Now what dispatcher is doing, that it receiving the actions and it broadcasts its payloads to the registered callbacks or to the store. The second one is the store. So store is acting like a container for application state and logic. The real work in the application is done in the store. The store, you can say, is registered to listen into the actions of the dispatcher, and it will work accordingly and it will update the view. So if I talk about view, or more specifically the controller views, so React components, they grab the state from the store, and then they pass it down to the child components. So that is how data binding works in React.js. It's a one-way data binding, or you can say unidirectional data flow. Now another concept of React.js, that is server-side rendering. So let's talk about server-side rendering now. So server-side rendering allows you to pre-render the initial state of your React components at the server side only. So server-side rendering, which is also called as SSR, in abbreviated form it is called SSR. It is the, you can say, ability of a JavaScript application to render on the server rather than on the browser. This is the exact definition of server-side rendering. I repeat this definition. Server-side rendering is the ability of a JavaScript application to render on the server rather than in the browser. Now, there could be a question in your mind that why would you ever want to do so? So now I will list down some of the advantages that why you want to do so, because it allows your site to have a faster page load time, which is the key to a good user experience. It helps in the SEO, that is search engine optimization. Because what will happen that without server-side rendering, all your server ships is an HTML page with no body. So just some script tags that are then used by the browser to render the application. So in nutshell, what is the difference between client-side rendering and server-side rendering? So in client-side rendering, your browser downloads a minimal HTML page. It renders the JavaScript and fills the content into it. This is client-side rendering. And what is server-side rendering? On the other hand, server-side rendering, it renders the React components on the server. And what is the output? The output is the HTML content. So that is the use of server-side rendering. So we talked about three important aspects of React.js, that is virtual DOM, data binding, and server-side rendering. Now let's talk about virtual DOM in detail. So if I talk about virtual DOM, as you can see on the screen, that model gives data to view, which in turn creates a DOM for it. So here a model. So model had information for the user, ID and location. It has been given, this data has been given to the view, which in turn has created the DOM. Now model gives data to the view, which in turn create the DOM, but you can see over here that if I change the user from Alan to Max, that is the only change which has happened in terms of three properties. As compared to three property, only one property has been changed, and that property only be reflected on the real DOM. That is the power of a virtual DOM. So as I talked about that, what is a virtual DOM, right? So virtual DOM only give updates to the real DOM. It not only gives the update so that the complete page or the complete HTML or CSS does not get loaded again and again on the screen. So now here see, if location is changed, okay, if I talk about the previous location was US, it was compared, and then you can see in the real DOM, the location is changed to UK. Because virtual DOM, it has not put heavy load on the view and makes our processing also very much faster. So with React.js, when model gives data to the view, if the DOM is empty, React will create a DOM for it. That is also a beauty, or you can say advantage of a virtual DOM. Now as you can see here, that with React.js, when model has given the data to the view, and if the DOM is empty, React will create a DOM for it. But at the same time, it is checking with the previous values, and if it has found previous value as Ln and the new value is Max, the user property has been changed to Max in the real DOM. So let's talk about the advantages of React.js now. What are the various advantages of React.js? The first one, application performance is increased. So which means that creating the dynamic web applications, now it has become very easier, and React.js is very much easier to learn. Now how the application performance is increased, we have already talked about that it uses a concept called virtual DOM. So enhancement of performance has been done, or you can say application performance is increased because of the concept of virtual DOM. It is used on the client side as well as on the server side. React.js can be used both on client side and server side, and it also known to be a SEO friendly, you can say, library. Readability is improved. This is one of the greatest advantage of React.js, that the readability of the code or the readability of the application has been improved a lot. Another is that it can be easily integrated or used with other frameworks like AngularJS or Meteor or Vue.js, even with Knockout.js or Ember.js. Another advantages of React.js I want to talk about here is that the reusable components. So React.js focuses on the concept of reusability. So React UI, as we know, that it is declared inside the components. So if I talk about a component here at this stage, so component is like a function that accepts the props as inputs and outputs the declared interface. The UI should be composed of as many as components as possible to maximize the reusability. So the concept says that you should decompose into multiple components your React.js application. At the same time, React.js is a very much famous library. So there are very much great developer tools available out there for, you can say, Chrome and Firefox. There are browser extensions for React available in Chrome and Firefox browsers. So these extensions, you can say, allows you to inspect the React component hierarchies in the virtual DOM. So you can select individual components and examine and edit their current properties and state. So these are some of the advantages of React.js. React.js is very much popular nowadays and is used by almost all the developers across the globe. Now, applications of React.js. So there are these famous applications which are using React.js in their applications or maybe browser application, and some are using in their mobile apps. So some are also using React Native instead of React, along with the React.js in fact. So some of the famous applications, one of them is obviously Facebook, Yahoo, Uber, Netflix, Twitter, Instagram, Dropbox, and New York Times. So these are some of the very big or famous applications which are using React.js or React Native in their website or in their mobile apps. Now, React.js installation. How you install the React.js in your application. This is very, very important to understand. Now, when I talk about React.js installation, so you can use it or you can install it in your environment by using the script tags either in a new HTML file or in your existing HTML file in an existing project. So if you are interested in playing around with React, what I want to give you that you can use online code playgrounds. So I will show you that. So what you can do is that you can use online playgrounds. For example, you can use Glitch, you can use CodePen, you can use Code Sandbox also. So these are some of the, you can say, open playgrounds which allows you to write code in React.js. If I talk about this particular CodePen.io website, so what you can do here is that you can write the HTML part, you can write your CSS, and you can write your JavaScript as well. But to configure this environment, what you have to do that you have to click on this gear sign in JS besides the JS. Once you click over it, you have to select the React libraries, which is first is React.js and second is React DOM.development.js. These two libraries you have to search from here and then edit. And another is JavaScript preprocessor, which you have to add. So once this is done, so that you are ready to play around the React.js code in these, you can say, online editors, which allows you to write code in React.js. But if I talk about the actual installation in your project or in your website, how you can add React to a website. So you can add React to an HTML page. So you can add React to an HTML page. So when starting a React project, a simple HTML page with a script tag might still be the best option. Okay. It only takes a minute to set up. It will take just a minute to set up the React.js in your existing HTML file. Now I will show you how to add a React component to an existing HTML page. You can follow along with your own website or create an empty HTML file for your practice. But before that, if I talk about React.js installation, you have to download some of the dependencies in your environment. So first one is download and install the npm. You can open the command prompt and go to a folder. You can write the command npm start installation, and then you have to install the webpack using npm. You have to install React and then Babel. Babel is used for JSX because internally JavaScript needs to be rendered on the browser. So what are the things which are required for React.js installation? So the first and foremost file is webpack.config.js. Now what is this file all about? It contains the information about the dependencies. What are the all dependencies is there, and the files from where browser should start rendering from. So it allows you to give the information of your startup file, and then you will have a HTML file which contains the complete HTML template which is used by the browser to render the elements. And then there will be a JSX file which contains the description of what all components we want to display on our web page and how they will behave. So let's get started, and we will see that how we can use React.js in an empty HTML file, how we can add the dependencies. And before starting that thing, let me tell you one thing, that before learning React.js, you should install Node.js in your environment. This is the official website of Node.js from where you can download the Node.js version. The left hand side is the LTS version, that is long-term support version, and the right one is the current version. You can install any version you want while working with React.js. That's not a problem at all. At the same time, for the beginners, for learning the JavaScript, this is a very good URL. I would recommend that. It allows you to understand complete JavaScript. From here, you can learn JavaScript if you are a beginner and you want to learn then React.js concepts. Okay, so let's get started. So what I'm going to do is that I have created a file. So first of all, you have to add a DOM container to the HTML. So what I have done is that in the plain HTML file, I have added two script tags. So you can just like this add the script tags in your HTML file. One script tag is for React.js library and another is for React DOM. So first of all, you have to add a DOM container to the HTML and add the script tags. Okay. So what I have done is that I have opened HTML page where I want to add it. Added a, you can say a div which is having a root div which is having an ID as root. So once this is completely set up, then I have added the script tags. So what are the script tags I have added? One is React.js and React DOM.js. Another script tag which is required for React.js application is Babel.min.js, which acts just like a preprocessor. Once it is done, then I am ready to create a React component. Okay. So what I have done is that in the script tag, I have just used React DOM.render. Now what is this React DOM? React DOM is a class, or you can say API, which contains a method called render. So React DOM.render, and this particular React DOM.render method takes two arguments. It is very important to note that React DOM.render method takes two arguments. The first argument is your HTML, or you can say JSX element. The second argument is the placeholder where you want to render your data or you want to render your element. So that is how we write React DOM.render. So let me save this file and let's run this file. So if I run this file on the web browser, so here is the output of this file, hello world. This is a simple plain React.js file where I have added the script tags for React.js. One is for React.js, another is for React DOM, and the third one is required for the pre-processing of the JSX component which is used over here. In the h1 tag, I have just written hello world, and that is how it is rendered on the browser. Okay. Now let's check another example. So I have one more example to show over here. So I have created two files, index.html and a JS file. So let's see this index.html file, what I have done. So in this index.html file, I have added some h2 tags, v tags, and then there is a div tag having a ID. And then there are two script tags for React.js and React DOM.js. And in this particular HTML file, what I'm doing is that I'm creating a React component in a custom JS file. So what I have done is that I have created a file like button.js. This is a custom file which will be next to my HTML page. And after the started code in the like button.js, if you see like button.js, what I have done that I have created a component. So this is class component, or you can say ES6 standard component. Okay. So what I have done that I have created a class like button which extends from react.component. As we said that it should have a constructor and super passing the props to this class. I have set the initial state this.state equal to like false, and every component should have a render method and a return statement. So in the render method, I'm just checking that if this.state.like, it will return me that you like this, and return in the on click calling a handler this.setState where I'm setting the state that liked equal to true. So initially liked was false, and finally it is clicked, the button is clicked, the state will be set as true. Similarly, react-dom.render, as we mentioned that it takes two arguments. One is your element and another is your placeholder where you want to render the output. Okay, so let's see the output of this particular demo. So you see here, it is giving me the desired output. What is the output? So see, what I have done is that in the HTML, first of all, I wrote add react in 1 minute. This page demonstrates. So this is just a simple static tag, or you can say static text, which is shown on the screen. Now the important part, there is a button. Okay. So on the click of that button, what I'm doing is that I'm setting the state. So I'm setting the state from false to true. So if you see in this example, if I click on this button, like, this state has been telling me that you like this. So that is how we can create components, or you can say class-based components in React.js. So let's move forward. Now we will talk about some React.js fundamentals. What are the various React.js fundamentals available in React.js? So first of them is JSX. So we will talk about JSX, components, props, state, lifecycle, events, refs, and keys. So all these we will talk about in a stepwise manner in a particular order, starting with JSX. So let's get started with JSX. So JSX stands for JavaScript XML. It makes your HTML very easy to understand. So if I talk about JSX, you can say it's a combination of JavaScript plus XML. Okay. So JavaScript, or you can say JSX, it allows you to include XML-like syntax in line with JavaScript. So React specifically uses JSX to describe the composition, you can say, of React components in a readable way. So what happens is that behind the scenes, there is a JSX transformer which pre-processes the JSX and converts each element into a JavaScript function call. So most of the projects uses Babel as a pre-processor, you can say, to convert JSX to JavaScript. So the TypeScript compiler, I can say that it is also capable of compiling the JSX. Okay, so if you are using TypeScript in your environment, you don't have to use Babel as well. JSX is a syntax which is included inline in JavaScript files that is converted by a preprocessor like Babel into regular JavaScript. Okay, so this is all about JSX. Now, if I talk about what are the various uses of JSX. So the first thing first, why it is called a JSX? It is called JSX because the type of syntax which is an extension to a JavaScript, and I will recommend you to use it with React to describe what the UI on the browser should look like. Okay, so JSX may remind you of a template language, but it comes with the full power of JavaScript. So you can also say that JSX produces React elements, and React embraces the fact that rendering logic is inherently coupled with other UI logic. Now, regular JSX. What is a regular JSX? So here what is written is a variable myComponent equal to react.create class. So as we talked about, react.create class is a ES5 JavaScript standard having a render function, render method, and a return statement. Now it will return this hello world. So just like a regular JSX statement, we can write in React components. Now JSX nested elements. So you can have multiple, you can say HTML elements nested within each other in JSX expression or in a React component. So just like here, there is a div, then h1, h2, p, and div close. So these are some of the elements which are nested, or you can say JSX nested elements. Now specifying the attributes. Now attributes are always specified in curly braces. Please remember that attributes, if you want to specify any attribute, okay, or you can put any valid also JavaScript expression also, but that should be inside a curly braces in JSX. So for example, if I write 2 plus 2, So 2 plus 2 is, you can say, static text in terms of JSX. But if I put it in curly braces, so curly braces, 2 plus 2, it will become 4. So here also in this example, some style is defined in the curly braces with background color as cyan. And in the return, I am using this style dev style equal to, in curly braces, this styles, then only this styles will be applied to the header. So please remember, if you want to specify attributes in JSX, you have to specify in the curly braces. And if I talk about also attributes specifying in JSX, you can also use quotes to specify the string literal as attributes. You may also use curly braces, but only thing is that don't put quotes around curly braces when embedding a JavaScript expression in an attribute. I will say that you should either use quotes, maybe for string values, or curly braces for expressions, but not both in the same attribute. So just try to understand that JSX is actually very closer to JavaScript and not HTML. So there are few key differences which has to be kept in mind while writing JSX. So let's move forward. So you can embed the JavaScript. So as I mentioned that if you have to calculate an expression, because JSX is an expression too, because as I mentioned that after the compilation of the code, JSX expressions become regular JavaScript function calls and they evaluate to JavaScript objects, which means that you can use JSX inside of if statements or for loops or while loops, and you can assign it to variables. They accept it as arguments and return it from the function. So in the return statement, if you want to write any JavaScript expression, you have to embed it in the curly braces, then only it will be calculated, else it will be treated as a static text. Now let's move to another fundamental of React.js, that is components. Now we'll talk about components in detail. So first thing first, that in React, everything is considered as a component. So I will say in React, everything is a component. So on the screen, you can see that there are multiple components, 1, 2, 4, 3, and 5. And on the web browser, we need to add them just like components. So they have been added just like a widgets or sections or web parts or specifically components. And all these components are integrated together in React to build one React application. So in React, what I can say is that components lets you split the UI into, you can say, independent reusable pieces of code, and you can think about each piece in isolation. And that is where the concept of reusability comes into picture, that each component can be reusable at a later point of time. But conceptually, components are like JavaScript functions. You can say like that. They accept some arbitrary inputs. So the inputs to a React component is called props, and they return React elements describing what should appear on the screen. We can easily update or change any of these components without disturbing the rest of the application. So as you can see that if I want to update or change any of the feature of this component 1, I can update it without disturbing the rest of the application, or you can say without disturbing the other components on my application. Now, how components are split internally. So single view of UI is divided into logical pieces. So on the left, you can see that it's a single view, or you can say React based application, but how it is divided internally into logical pieces. So the concept of component in React.js always says that you should have a parent component, and then you can have child components or sub components, and it behaves like a tree. So at the top, you will have parent component, or you can say base component, and then there will be some branches or some branches beneath it. So the starting components becomes the root. It's called the root component, and the rest of the all other becomes, you can say, the branches and the sub branches. So in this diagram, you can see the component 1 is the root of the UI tree, 2 and 3 are the children of 1, and 4 and 5 are the sub branches of the second component. So that is how you can split the complete UI in React.js components. Now each component returns one DOM element. So as I mentioned that in every component you should have a render method and a return statement. So each component in React.js, it returns one DOM element. And how it is returned, that there is an API called React DOM, and it has a method called render. So React DOM.render will allows you to render the different components on your application. So the JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So always please remember that if you have to embed the JSX elements inside a return statement or a render method, you have to wrap it in an enclosing tag. So here I am creating a ES6 standard component, class component 3. So 1, 2, 4 and 5, 3 is here, which is written like this, that hello world, welcome to Edureka. And React DOM.render, I am calling the component 1 because component 1 is my root component. And where I want to show you is the ID of that div element, that is document.getElementById by ID content. Now, if I talk about props and state, so React components are basically controlled either by props or you can say by state. So we will talk about them now. But before that, what are just a summary of the components? That everything in React is a component. Each component returns a DOM object. As I mentioned, that component divides your UI or splits your UI into independent reusable pieces. And then each independent piece is processed separately. A component can be divided into a root component and into the child components. And then we can further split into smaller components. Now, this is very important to understand that how you render a component. So when React sees an element representing a user-defined component, it passes the JSX attributes to this component as a single object. And those are called specifically props. So you see here, this is a function welcome, which is just like a component having some props as a parameter. So we call here React DOM.render with the welcome name. Welcome name, let's say name is the prop over here having the value Vipul. And React calls this welcome component with the name Vipul as the prop. So this becomes name equal to Vipul is the props. Welcome is a component which returns h1 tag, and then React DOM efficiently updates the DOM to match this h1 tag. That is how a component is rendered in React.js. Now the other fundamental, the most, again, a very important, you can say, fundamental of React.js are the props. Now what are props? So prop helps components to converse with each other or to communicate with each other. This is, I can compare it with, you can say, arguments or parameters of a function. So if in this example, class body extends React.component, return header in footer. Now in header, name equal to Bob and name equal to Alex. So how can I return this property to this class component? By using this.props.name. So what this .props.name will return? This.props.name, when it comes to header, it will return Bob. And this.props.name for the footer component, it will return me Alex. So how you can access props in React.js? If you want to access props in React.js, the syntax is this.props.name. So using props, we can configure the components. So now I have another header and footer components, and I'm passing a different value, name equal to Miller and name equal to Cody. So in the header component, if I write this.props.name, in the previous example also I wrote this.props.name, but the value was something different. And in this case, the footer component will return me this.props.name, the value will be Cody. So props are basically used with components. They revolve around the components. They help in the conversation of different components. Via props, we can do the conversation or communication between the different components in React.js. And how to access those props? The props are accessed using this.props.name, or you can say this.props. The attribute name or attribute value. So if I talk about props, they work similar to HTML attributes. Data flows from downwards from the parent component. So as we are talking about a UI tree, a parent-child relationship. So in terms of props, it's a unidirectional flow of data. Props are immutable. That is, they are pure. Here we are talking about pure functions or pure components. So props are immutable. So as compared to state, which is mutable, which we'll talk later, but props, please remember, are immutable. So they are pure in nature. They can set default props. So we can set some default properties around the props. Now let's talk about what is pure and impure here we are talking about. So whether you declare a component as a function or a class. So as we talked about, components can be of two types, a function component or a class component. But it must never modify its own props. So props are always read only. They are immutable in nature. So it is very well said that all React component must act like pure function with respect to their props. So let's talk about what is this pure function and what is this impure function here we are talking about. So for example, there is a function called sum having parameters a and b, and it is returning a plus b. So in this particular example, this is called a pure function. Why they are called pure? Because they are not attempting to change the input values. They will always return the same result for the same input. So by that what I mean is that I am not altering the value of a or b inside the function definition. That's why this is called a pure function. But when I talk about an impure function, because the function is impure, so it changes its own input. So for this particular function, the input was account and amount, and you can see there that I am changing the value of account. So it becomes an impure function, and that is not allowed when it comes to components and props, because all React component must act like pure function. So props are read only, or you can say props are immutable in nature. Now components and props. We talked about that there are two types of components you can create in React.js, because components allow you to split the UI into independent reusable pieces, and you can think about each piece in isolation. They are basically just like JavaScript functions, but there are two types of components which you can create based on ES5 or ES6 standard. So if it comes to ES5 standard, you can create a functional components, but the recommended way, and I will recommend that you always create a class component. So how you will create a function component? Normally just like we create a function. So function welcome having some props or the parameters. But if you want to create a class component, so you have to use the keyword class, the component name, which extends from react.component, and it should always have a render method and a return statement. So that is, these two are the different types of components which we can create, but from a React point of view, they are always equivalent. These two forms of component are always equivalent. Now another fundamental is state, but before moving to the state, or you can say another fundamental, let's get deep dive into some of the examples, so that the three basic fundamentals which we talked about, JSX, components and props, you can have better understanding about these. Okay, so let's get started. So I am just opening the Node.js command prompt. So I have opened the prompt. So I am moving to the D drive, and I am moving to a specified location. And then I am opening the code in an editor called Visual Studio Code. So let's talk about the basic example that how you can render the JSX in React.js. A very basic and simple example we will talk about, that how you can render JSX in React.js. Okay, so what we have done over here is that we have a React library, the reference of a React library, okay, and then reference of a React DOM.library, and then reference of the Babel.js. In the script tag, I have called React DOM.render, and in that React DOM.render, because we want to render the JSX, okay, and please remember that you have to use script type equal to text Babel to indicate the JSX code. In JavaScript of jQuery, we refer script type equal to text/JavaScript, but when we are working with JSX, you have to use script type equal to text/Babel to indicate the JSX code and include babel.min.js. This is very important. And this babel.min.js, this is a browser version of Babel. Okay. Now, if I run this code, what will happen that in this script tag will get executed, and the React DOM.render I have written hello world. So let's run this piece of code. So I'm just running this HTML file and opening it in a browser. So you can see the output that it is showing me hello world, which is written in the script tag in React DOM.render in the h1 tag. So please remember that this render method takes two parameters always. The first is your JSX element and another is your placeholder. Okay. Let's move to the another demo where we will see that how we can use the JavaScript in JSX. So as we know that we can also use JavaScript in JSX. It takes the angle brackets as the beginning of the HTML syntax and curly braces as the beginning of the JavaScript syntax. Okay. So here you can see that I have created an array, names equal to some names, and in the React DOM.render, I am using a JavaScript. names, on the names array, I am using the map method, which is calling on the name and on the index key, that is a key value pair. And in this, I am returning the key equal to index hello and the name. Now you see here, this name is represented in the curly braces as an attribute, because names, if I don't put it in the curly braces, will be considered as a simple text. So let me save this file and run this. So you see here, hello Alice, hello Emily, and hello Kate. The reason being why this output, because I have written here is hello and passing the parameter as a JSX. So I'm using the JavaScript and the JSX and looping around the values in an array using the map function or map method, which is inbuilt method of the array collection. So that is why this particular output is shown, hello Alice, hello Emily, and hello Kate, because these are the three values which are there in my array. Okay. Now let's move to another example. Again, a very simple one, that I have created an array having the key values as 1 and 2. Now in the React DOM.render, I am calling this array. Now what will happen, that in my output, it will represent that hello world, React is awesome. Now in this example, what I am doing is I am defining a component. So we talked about props, we talked about JSX, we talked about components, right? So in this particular example, I am defining a component. So what is the syntax for defining the component? Class, then the component name, which extends from react.component. Then it creates a component class and it implements a render method. Please remember that the class components or the function components always should have a render method. Class components always implements a render method to return a component instance of the class. So if I talk about before version 16 of React.js, it uses react.create class to create a component class. Now it has been deprecated and we are using the ES6 standard. Okay. Now components can have attribute and you can use this.props dot some attribute to access them. Just like in this case, I am using this.props.name. So what I am doing is that in React DOM.render, as I mentioned, you have to call the parent component or you can have to call the root element. In this case, there is a component called hello message. Okay. Now in the hello message component, I am passing a prop with the attribute name, let's say equal to name, and its value is John. Now what will happen in the hello message, it is returning hello this.props.name. As I mentioned while talking about the props, that how you can access the prop. Okay, how you can access the prop. So how you can access the prop? You can access the prop is this.props.attribute name. Please remember how you can access it. This.props.attribute name. This is very important to understand. And now let's see the output of this. I'm opening it in the browser. It is showing me the output, hello John. Okay. Now let's talk about this.props.children. Now what is the use of this.props.children? So React uses this.props.children to access component children nodes, or you can say child nodes. So you can see here this.props.children. So please remember that the value of this.props.children, it could have three possibilities in fact. So if the component has no node, then the value will be undefined. Then the second possibility could be that it can have a single child node, let's say an object, and if multiple children nodes, then it will become an array. I repeat that there are three possibilities while using this.props.children. So component can have no children node, then the value will be undefined in that case. If it has single children node, then it will be an object, and if it has multiple children nodes, then it will be an array. So React gives us the utility called react.children. This is react.children. This is a utility given by React for dealing with this.props.children data structure. So we could have used react.children.map to iterate into the childrens of the component without worrying its data type being undefined or object. So what I'm doing over here is that I've created a nodes list component that is a class component. So class nodes list extends react.component. It implements a render method and it returns the instance of this particular class. Since we are accessing the children of the particular component. So we can use react.children.map. In this, I'm calling this.props.children, and it could have three possibilities. But in this case, since we have a children, so our output would be hello world. In this case, the output will be hello world in a LI structure. So that is how you can use or you can access the children components also of a particular component. Let's move to another example. So prop types. Components can have specific attributes which are called props in React and can be of any types. It can be of any type. So here you can say prop types.string.is required. So what happens is that sometimes you need a way to validate the props. So you don't want users to have the freedom to input anything into your component. So React has a solution for it, and it is called prop type. So what we are doing is that we are saying that prop types is of type string and it is required. This is kind of a validation we are doing. So what is done in this particular example is that the my title is a component, has a props of title. Prop type tells React that the title is required, it is required, and its value should be of type string. Now if we give, let's say for example, title a number value, so where data equal to, let's say 1 to 3 for example, okay, then it will result in an error, which means the props does not pass the validation and the console will show you an error message, something like, let's say, failed prop type. So what I'm doing over here is my title, I'm calling the component, and there is a title where I'm passing the data, and data is 1 to 3. Okay, so that is how you can implement some kind of validations, or you can apply some kind of rules where you don't want to give the user a freedom to write anything in your component. So these are some of the basic examples we talked about for JSX, for props, and for components. Now let's move to another set of examples. So let me close this very quickly. Okay, so these are again some of the small examples which allows you to work with JSX, props, and components. But before starting this, let me tell you one thing very quickly, that as I told you that this is the Node.js website from where you can install the latest Node.js version. And once you install, so there is a GitHub project provided by Microsoft, an open source project, which is called Create React App. So you have to write the command like this: npm create npm install create react app. And once you press the enter, so a project will be created for you, a complete React based project will be created for you, which will allow you to have the complete solution structure in terms of index.js, index.css, app.js, and app.css. So you will have a src folder and a public folder. So these two folders are very important, and we will talk about this in detail. So what happens once you create a project based on Create React App application, a solution, a built-in solution is given to you, which allows you to write the code or to test your different functionalities. So it has two folders. One is the public folder where we have one HTML file called index.html, where we have defined a root element in a div with the ID as root. If I go to the source folder, the starting file is the index.js. In the index.js, we have react dom.render. Now, as you can see at the top that we have imported React, we have imported React DOM, imported the index from the solution structure. Now, React dom.render calls the parent component, which is the app. App is the name of my parent component. So if I go to app.js, there is a parent component, class app extends component. You can either write component or you can also write react.component. That's not a problem at all. Every component, as I mentioned, should implement a render method, and there is a return statement which returns the instance of that particular class. Now I can write the JSX inside the component in the return statement, simple HTML and the JS structure. The div, I have given the div class name equal to app. Now there is a header. In this header, I have implemented an image with a class name app logo alt equal to logo and h1 equal to class name app title. Now this header tag is closed here. Now you see the important thing over here. In the main component, as I said that the basic principle of React.js that you have to decompose your complete application into multiple sub components. So at the top there will be a parent component and there will be sub branches or branches of that particular component. So the first component, the parent component, is app. Inside it I have called three different components. One is the demo class, another is author, and another is CMP style. So first, this demo class subcomponent will be called. With this subcomponent, a prop is defined. A prop, or you can say parameter, is defined with the value React classes. The value of this particular, you can say, prop, it will be used in the definition of the demo class component. So if I go to the demo class, since it's a class component, it should implement a render method and a return statement. So how you can use the props? You can use the props by using this dot props. So that is how it is used over here. This dot props, and what is the attribute name? The attribute name is the demo class. The second subcomponent which is called is the author. Now author again has an attribute called author name, which is used in this component class author extends component, render implementation, and then a return statement. This dot props dot author name, which means that whatever attribute to define over here can be used in the component by using the syntax this dot props dot attribute name. Now the third component is a little bit different. The attribute name is a student name, but here what I have done is that in the render method I have applied a custom CSS just to show you that how you can use the attributes within the JSX in a curly bracket. So where my style, some styling has been given, and in the return statement style equal to my style. Now this my style is put in a curly bracket, which becomes a JSX statement. After that I have done some calculations. So you can see here calculation 4 minus 2 equal to, it is in bracket, then only this value will be shown. Okay. Now to run this create React application, if I go to package.json file, so what is package.json? So package.json you can say is the introduction of any React based application, or you can say the basic information of that React based application. So it gives me about the name, about the version, about the private dependencies and the scripts. So there are some default scripts. At the same time, you can create some custom script of yours. So there is a script called start. So if I have to run this complete project or application, how I have to write it? So in the Node.js command prompt, I have to write npm start. So I have clicked enter and this will open the browser on the local host on the port number 3000. So now you can see here the output that there was a header. In the header there was an image, a text, and this is React classes by Vipul Jain, and you can see the calculation has been done because we placed the attribute, the complete JSX, or you can say JavaScript expression, in the curly bracket. So this is the output of this particular code which I showed you in app.js. Now the beauty of this particular application is that whenever you will change the code, whenever you make some changes, you don't have to run the npm start again and again. The changes will be reflected on the browser instantaneously. So you can say that this particular application is very much reactive in nature. So whenever you change the code or update any code, it will directly get reflected on the browser. Okay. So let's go to index.js and start making some changes in the code. So I'll start with again basic JSX elements so that you can understand how we can write JSX. This is a very simple example again, React DOM.render h1 hello world. So if I go on the screen, I have not saved it. If I save this file and if I go to the screen, it shows me hello world. I have not refreshed the screen. It's very much reactive in nature. Okay. Now let's talk about some more examples. We'll quickly see some more examples. JSX. I'm just showing you as of now JSX, props and components examples. Once this will be completed, then we will talk about state, lifecycle events and the remaining concepts of React.js. So in this particular example, how you can add your JSX. In the previous example, if you have seen that in the React DOM.render, I have added the complete element as the first argument for React DOM.render. But there is one more practice which you can follow, that instead of writing the complete JSX or HTML expression in the React DOM.render first parameter, what you can do is that you can create an element outside the React DOM.render and then pass that element in the React DOM.render method. So what I've done is that I've created a dummy text and created a const element. In that I have created a div structure. In that div structure, what I'm doing is that I'm creating a button, class name equal to button, the text is button, and then a sample text will be displayed. Once this constant element, or you can say a JSX expression, is created, I can pass this to React DOM.render like this. So let's save this file and see the output. You can see the output that there is a button and some sample text shown on the screen. So this is the best practice you can say to write the JSX expressions or JSX elements, because your JSX elements can go bigger and bigger. If it is a single line JSX expression or JSX statement, you can very well write it in React DOM.render. But if it is very big or going to become very big, then you can put it outside React DOM.render in a constant element, and then you can pass the React DOM.render that element just like shown on the screen. Now we will see the example how you can render the elements using JSX. Now how you can render the elements using JSX. Now in this particular example, please remember that every React application, it should start from React DOM.render. So how the data flow goes, it goes from React DOM.render. So first we will see what is passed over here. The element which is passed is const element. Now in this const element, what we are passing is in h1 hello format name, and we have passed props as user. Now what is format name? You can see that format name is used as a function component. The parameter passed is user, and for this user, the properties using the arrow function, here the arrow function is used. The properties for this user.firstname and user.lastname is used as in the arrow function, which are passed to this particular function as the properties. So return user.firstname and return user.lastname. And in the React DOM.render, I'm calling this element. So let's save this file, and what output it will give me? It will give me the hello user, hello format name. Format name is calling a user, so user is Vipul Jain. So hello Vipul Jain, because Vipul is the first name and Jain is the last name. So let's close this quickly. Now let's talk about some other example that how you can render the elements in React.js. Now we'll start with React DOM.render. In React DOM.render, there is a parent component which is clock. Now what is happening in this clock is that this clock is declared as, you can say, class component. So class clock extends React.component. A constructor, a super is defined, and we are setting the state, this dot state. Please remember, state is always set, the initial state is always set by using this dot state, and in this dot state we are passing date as the new date. In the component did mount and component will mount, we'll talk about this later because these are lifecycle methods. In this, just we are calling different methods, and we are setting the state in the tick method, tick function. We are setting this with the date new. Now what will happen that in the render method there is a h1 hello Vipul, and in the h2 how we set the state? Please remember that we set the props using this dot props dot attribute name, and this likewise we set the state this dot state dot attribute. So here what I'm doing, this dot set state dot date dot to local string, which will show me the current date or time. So hello Vipul, it is 10:36 p.m. That is how we can set the initial state and final state in React.js. Now components and props. Now let's talk about what are the components and props. So we already saw that in React DOM.render we can pass the element, but in the element again, instead of passing the complete JSX statement, we can pass it as a component. So you can see over here const element. In the previous example, I showed you that in the element there was a JSX expression having some div, some p tag, some h1 tag. But in this particular example, I am passing a component to the constant element. The component name is welcome, having some attribute called last name. Now in the definition of this particular component, which is function welcome, I am returning h1 hello props dot last name. Now what is last name? Jen. So let's save this and let's check the output. You can see here hello last name. This is my last name. That is how you can render the components and props in React.js. It's very simple. very straightforward in nature. Now this is just an interesting one having some null value. So how you can conditionally render a React component. This is very important to understand that in element, I have a component called message having attribute message having the value as null. Now in the React DOM.render, I am passing this element and calling the message component. So let's save this file and see the output. So there is no output you can see on the screen because I am passing a null value. So you can also conditionally render a React component. So let's move to another example that how you can style the React component. Very, very important to understand that how you can do the styling in the React component, because please remember, just like in native JavaScript and jQuery, we used class equal to some name to, let's say, style any tag or component in JavaScript or jQuery. But in React, we use the class name. This is a keyword. So instead of class, we use class name. So this class name I have defined in index.css. So if I save this and see, so you see here, this is the CSS which is defined and the text rendered is Ripplebox because the text is given over here is Ripplebox. So this is a box small, you can say a class which is defined. So if I go to in index.css, this is the box small class which is defined. So defining the class in CSS, it's pretty same by the dot. By the dot operator, you have to define the class. But for calling that class, instead of class keyword, you have to use the class name keyword. This is very, very important to understand in React.js. Now I will show you a very good example of React.js that how you can implement a multiple choice question kind of functionality in React.js. Very important to understand. So let me close this. So for stopping this npm start, you can press Ctrl C on your keyboard. It will ask that you want to terminate the batch job. You can press yes and then press enter. I'm just opening another example. Let's close everything. Just open this in Visual Studio Code. A very good example, we will see that again the same example, index.js, I have app.js defined and index.js. In index.js, I am calling React DOM.render. In this, the parent component will be called. The parent component is app, and here in app.js, this parent component is written as a function component. You can see here that it is written as a function component, right? So let's run this code first of all to see it running. So for running any React based create React app application, you have to use the command npm start. So I have just entered the command npm start and pressed enter. So it will open up in the browser. So meanwhile, we will see the code what is written in this function component in app.js. So in index.js, I have written React DOM.render. This is the parent component, and document.getElement by ID where I want to display or render the output. Okay, so let's go to app.js. So in this app.js, since this is a function component, I have a return statement over here. In this return statement, I have written some basic HTML. So header tag is there. So in this header tag, what I have done is that specified the class name, because you have to specify it with the class name. Some image will be there. And then in the anchor tag, I have written some static text. So it's running as of now. It's starting the server, npm server. No problem. We'll move to the code again. Okay. Now in this particular example, what I want to show you is a multiple choice kind of functionality, multiple choice question quiz, you can say. So let me just do the uncommenting and let me comment this React DOM.render, else there will be multiple React DOM.render. I don't want that. Okay. So this is the application which we want to create. Now the question here is that how we can create this type of application. Now this is a multiple choice question application which is created in React.js. Now as you can see, this is the output which I'm showing you. Now as you can see on the screen that there is a section called correct and incorrect. So this is my score area. You can say that this is called a score area. Below is my question area. Now these are the two high level areas or components I have talked about. But at the same time, I can split this complete UI into sub components. So when I say this is the score area, okay, or let's say the outer complete boundary is the quiz, then I have a score area. In this score area, I have two sub components, the correct answer and the incorrect answer. And in the question area, I can have two sub components, the question and the choices. So if you see, it asks me that what is 8 into 1. If I click on 8, see the answer goes as correct and the state is changed to correct equal to 1, right? So I just want to show you in this particular example that how you can decompose your UI or decompose your React application into sub components, or you can say you can create a parent-child kind of hierarchy. Although some advanced concepts are used to build this particular application, which I'm not going to tell you as of now, but I just want to show you that how you can decompose an application if it is given as a requirement or problem to you, then how you can decompose it into different components. So let's go back to the code and let's directly go to React DOM.render. Now in this React DOM.render, the first component, or you can say the root or the parent component which is called, is the quiz component. Now let's go to the quiz component. Where is the quiz component? So this is the quiz component. Now this is a class-based quiz component following the ES6 standard. Class quiz extends React.component having a constructor, super, and a data set is defined with the correct answer. Now once this data set is defined, okay, now we are setting the state, initial state, that is this dot state, and binding some click events, or you can say functions, to it. But the most important part is the render method, or which implements this component, implements a render method. So in this render method, in the return statement, I have two sub components which I was telling you about, that this particular quiz can be divided into sub components, two sub components. One is the quiz area and another is the score area. So you can see here, one is the score area which will have the correct answers and the incorrect answers, and another is the quiz area. Now if I go to, let's say, the score area component. So if I go to, let me show you the score area component. This is the score area component. As I told you that this again score area component can be divided into two sub components. One is for the correct answers and one is for the incorrect answers. So you can see over here that there are two other sub components, total correct and total incorrect, right? So these are the two sub components which are called in the score area component at the top. Now if I show you the other one, which is the question area, so in the main one we have the quiz area. In the quiz area I can have two sub components, one is the question and one is the answer list. So you can see this is my question and this is the complete answer list. So if I say this question and if I click on, let's say, wrong answer, so it becomes an incorrect answer, right? So that is how you can divide a React application or decompose a React applications into components or sub-components. So in this particular example, let me repeat once again very quickly that this particular application divided into two main components, that is the question and the score area. Again, the score area is divided into the correct answer and the incorrect answer. Those can be considered as two subcomponents of the score area component. And then this quiz area is divided into the question and the answer list. So you can see over here that this quiz area is divided into question subcomponent and the answer list subcomponent. So these are the three important aspects, and then we'll move forward to the other React.js fundamental, which starts with states. Okay, so till now we talked about the fundamentals of React.js, wherein we talked about ES5 and ES6 refactoring. We talked about what are the advantages of React.js, and we also talk about some of the fundamentals like JSX, components, and props. So we talked about these in detail, that what are the various types of components we can create. We can create functional components and we can create class components. But going forward, please remember that ES6 standard says that you have to create class components only, because now we are going to talk about states. So what are states in React.js? So just like we have props, we talked about props in React.js, which is used for data management in React.js. So in addition to props, React component have another way of holding the data, and which is called a state. So what is a state? So components can change. So to keep track of the various changes or the updates happening in the component over the time, we use the concept of state. So in this example, as you can see, let's say there is ice, state changes. Event has happened on this particular ice, and because of this change of event, state changes. So what is the state or the event which is changed over here? Let's say we have increased the temperature. And because of this increase in temperature, the ice has been converted to water. So what we can say is that the previous state of this particular object was ice, and when some event has happened on a component, which is in this case is increase in temperature, the final state has become water. So for state, we can say that unlike props, component states are mutable. Because in props, we talked about that React props are immutable in nature, which means they talk about pure functions, or they talk about that you cannot change the value of the props inside a component. But unlike props, the component states are mutable. So as I mentioned that React components have another way to hold the data, and which is called state. Now objects which control the components rendering and behavior. So states are the one which handle or control the components rendering and behavior. And you can say this is the core of any React component. As you can see on the screen, that component is central to any tree, and around it revolves the props and the state. But the important thing is that state should be kept simple as much as possible, because we know what are props. How can you compare the props and state? So props are the values which is passed in by a component parent. So you can see here that the props, these are the value passed in by a component parent. So this value is passed to another component as a prop, and the value is again passed to another component as a prop. Its state is local, mutable data that can be created and modified within the component. This is the definition of state, you can say. So state is local, it should be very simple in nature, and mutable data which can be created and modified within the component. Now what is the use of having the local data, or you can say local state? Having local data that can change within a component increases complexity and limits the composability of the component. So when we talk about props, we have local data which flows from one component to another component. But the problem with this is that it can change within the component and can increase the complexity, and also limits the composability of any component. So when we talk about state in React.js, please remember that to use state in React.js, you have to use a class component. There will be no more function components in our projects if you want to use a state. And in the class constructor, since we are talking about class components, so there will be a default constructor over there. We will initialize the component state to a sensible default value. So just to repeat once again, what is a state? A state is just another way of holding the data in React.js. Now this is something very important, that components in React.js can be in two forms. You can create again two types of component. One is a stateless component and another is a stateful component. Now what is the difference between these two, stateless and stateful? Because we talked about components, components can be created by two ways. Now when I say stateless means it does not remember anything it does. It does not keep track of any state. And what is a stateful? It remembers everything it does. It keeps track of every change on an event or any update in the event. Now let's talk about stateless and stateful. First of all, what is a stateless? So as we talked about, stateless means it does not remember anything it does, and stateful is it remembers everything it does, which means if there is any change in the state, it keeps track of that particular thing or particular change or particular update because of an event. Now stateless, it calculates the internal state of components. And what is stateful? It is the core or heart of React.js, you can say, which stores the information about the component state in memory. The stateless components, they never change their state. But stateful components, as I talked about, that they can change their state, because there will be an initial state and there will be a final state. So they can change their states. The stateless components, they contains no knowledge of the past. So for example, if there was an initial state which you have set using this.state, and you want to change or update that state using this.setState, but stateless components, they don't contain any knowledge of the past events. Only the current and possible future state changes can be tracked in stateless components. When we talk about stateful, they have knowledge of the past, current, and possible future state changes values. So that's why they are called stateful, because they keep track of the previous state also. Stateless components, you can say they provide referential transparency. That is, for small inputs, it will produce the same output. So if you give different inputs, small inputs, same inputs, you can get the same output. In stateful component, it receives information from the stateless components if state change is required. So these are some of the basic differences between a stateless and a stateful component. Now this is just again a summary for this stateless and stateful React.js components. So as we talked about what is a stateless, so all function-based components can be considered as stateless React.js component. But here we are talking about that when we are talking about state in detail, we'll talk about state and we'll see many examples. So we will talk about only class-based components and not the function-based components. So that's why we are saying over here that function-based components can be considered as stateless React.js components. So stateless React.js components, so which means they are pure JavaScript functions. So we don't need to have state over there in stateless React.js components. But as per the future trend and the latest technologies, we are using stateful React.js components which keep track of your previous state, your current state, and probably all the future states. So all class-based components can be considered as stateful React.js components. And stateful React.js components inherits from a particular class called React.component. So state also getting inherited from parent to the child. So this was the brief about the state and what are the different types of component based on the stateless component and the stateful component in React.js. Before going to the demo, I will talk about something called set state. So as we are saying that there are stateful React.js components, what does it mean? So you have to set your initial state and then you will set the final state. So that is the, you can say, current state and the future state. So there is a method called set state. Now what does it do? So you can set the initial state by using this.state. But if you want to set the future state or you want to update the state, you have to use a method called this.setState. Now setState method, it merges the new state with the old state. So for example, your new state value is 1 and the previous state value was 0 or maybe false and true. The latest value will become the combination of the new state with the old state. So all the previous state will remain unless it is overwritten. So if you are not overriding or overwriting the previous state, it will remain in the memory. So for example, consider a state object with properties A and B having values, for example, 1 and 2. So A is equal to 1 and B is equal to 2 respectively. Now calling set state, what will happen? So calling set state with the property B equal to 3 and C equal to 4. So it will produce a new object where B will become 3 and C is equal to 4. But the previous value of B was 2. So that is how the property of A remains unchanged. The property B in this case is overwritten by the new state, and in this object of the state, property C is newly added. So in addition to changing the state of the component, set state, please remember set state method is very important, is also causes the component to be rendered eventually. And for performance reason, you can say set state calls a batch method, and there is no guarantee that the state can change immediately. So by this we mean that there is a method called setState by which we can set the final state of any React.js component, a class component. Now let's move to some demo that how we can implement this kind of functionality. So let's see this. So this is your index.html, a simple HTML file where I am calling a script called likebutton.js by using the script tag. And in this likebutton.js script, I am using the class component and the concept of state. So this is my first example, or you can say first demo, a very simple one to let you understand that how we can work with React.js state feature, or you can say aspect. Because React thinks of a component as a state machine, and you can use this.state to hold the component state. So let's write this code. What I want to do is that in React DOM.render, I am calling a component, let's say called app. Now I will go to app.js, where I would be writing this component. So this is a function component. I don't want any function component anymore. I'm just commenting it, and I have commented this, and I'm also commenting this. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to write a component with the name, let's say app. How I will write it? I will write class app. It will extends from a parent class called react.component. And in this react.component, you have to specify a constructor which will have the parameter as props. And in this constructor, you have to call super, which will return again the props to the class instance. And then you have to set the initial state. This is very important, that how you can set the initial state by using this dot state. This is the initial state which I am setting over here. And this dot state I am setting is, let's say for example, light is my property and initial value is false. And then you have a event, for example, this dot handle click is equal to, I am binding this event to the class, this dot handle click dot bind to this. That's it. So we have set the initial state, and what we have done is that we have bind an event handler to this particular class. Now we already know that every class component will have a render method. So we will implement the render method over here. Now in this render method, what I am going to do is that I will have a return statement. So before that, I am just writing a variable called var text, where I am checking the state. So this dot state dot light, I will check this using a ternary operator. If it is true, then it will show me like, else it will show me that I have not liked it. That's it. I've just created a variable and then I will have a return statement. Now what I'm going to write in this return statement, I'm just writing a simple JSX over here. A very simple JSX I'm going to write, a p tag. I'm just passing this text as an attribute in the parenthesis. I'm just writing a dummy text. Now what we are going to do is that we have method handle click, which we are going to define now. So handle click based on an event. And in this event, what I'm saying is that I'm going to set the state now. So in this particular example, what we have seen is that I have created a class component which extends from react.component. It should have this dot state, reason being I am setting the initial state. It has a on-click event, you can say, which is binded to this particular class. Then there will be a render method which is required. In this render method, there will be a return statement. And in this return statement, I am checking the on-click. So on-click event I am checking over here. And what I will call this dot my event name. What is my event name? Handle click. Now on the click of the, let's say p tag, what I want to call? I want to call this handle click. So in this handle click, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to set the state, because my initial state is liked equal to false. Now I want to set the final state. Now final state is set by, as I mentioned, this dot set state. Now let's define the property over here. What was our property? The property name is light. And what I want to define is this dot state dot light value. That's it. So what's going to happen is that I have mentioned the not, so it will automatically become true because initial value light value is false. So this completes my code over here. Let me repeat once again. I am using the create react app application. In this create react app application, we can change maybe the component name also. So this component name needs to be called in index.js and just save it. So what we are doing over here is that in the react.render, I am calling a component. This component is defined in your app.js. Now in this app.js, what I am doing is that this is the like button. Now like button is a class based component. You can see here that it is defined as class. Now let's define this export default like button. And this is used over here in index.js like button. Correct? Now what will happen that you have set the initial state using this dot state equal to liked false. And in the handle click, whenever that p tag on click event will be called, this handle click event will be called, which will set the final state of this particular p tag. So what we are saying is that my initial state is false, and whenever a button or any control will be clicked, I am changing it to true. So I am changing the state of that particular control. Now let's see the output of this particular application. What I'm going to do is that I'm opening it in the browser. Now you can see that this is a static text, and when I'm clicking this particular button, like, it is saying me the message that you like this. Just like we wrote over here, you like this. So it is showing me the message that you like this. So that is how you can set the initial state and final state of any React component. Now just to repeat once again, that what we are saying is that for setting the initial state, you have to use this dot state, and for setting the final state, you have to use this dot set state method, just as you can see on the screen. Okay. Now we are talking about state here. Let me tell you that state is similar to props, but only thing is that it is mutable and fully controlled by the component. Because what is happening that right now we are storing all the data in an array in a variable, for example. But that is a good way to start with React.js. But later on, if you want some more operations or more frequent flow of data in React.js, you can think of a state. So you can think of a state as any data that should be saved and modified without necessarily being added to a database. So you can say state is a place from where the data comes from. And we should always try to make our state as simple as possible and minimize the number of stateful components. So for example, if we have, let's say, 10 components that need data from the state, so we should create one container component that will keep the state for all of them. We should not create 10 components. We should create one component as a parent component, and then the other could be the child components. Okay, now let's see more examples based on the state. So what I'm going to do is I will create more state examples or state demos to show you the concept of state in detail. I'm going to create a class component. So class app, which extends from react.component. I'm using a create react app GitHub project, Facebook project you can say. And in the react dom.render, I have to call this app component. So let's call first this in index.js, this particular component, app. And then in app.js, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a class component with the name app. So first thing first we have to create the constructor, which is passing the props. And then in constructor, what you are going to do, you are going to set the super keyword. This is the first and most important thing to do in the constructor. And then what you are going to do in the constructor, as I mentioned, that the best place to set your initial state in React.js is the constructor. Okay, so I'm going to write this dot state. I'm setting the initial state over here. Please remember that if you have to set the initial state, you have to do it with this dot state. In this dot state, you can define n number of properties. Any properties you want, you can define in this. So let's define over here, for example, two properties. One property I have, let's say, for example, header. This is just a property. I can write a text for it. Let's say header from state. Any text you can write. This is just setting the initial state. And then I have one more property. Let's say, for example, content. This is my second property in my initial state. And any text I can write, which I can write as content from state. So what I have done is that I have set the initial state with the two properties, header and content. This we are creating a class component. Now every class component, you already know, it should implement a method which is called render, and every render statement should have a return state. So I'm saying render and then I'm saying return. In this return, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define my some custom, you can say JSX. So let's define in return. So for example, I have a div. I want to write a div. In this div, I have h1 tag. In this h1 tag, I will define my one property called header. And then again, I have a h2 tag where I will define another property called content. So let's save this file. Now, how you set the state? Now, even you can set the state in JSX. So just like this, if you want to set the state in JSX, you have to place this curly braces. And what will be the state you want to become? So it should become this dot state dot value is header. because header is a property which we have already defined. And here I want to say this dot state dot, for example, content. In the previous example, you might remember that I used this dot props dot attribute name. Similarly, in state also, while using the state, we can use for setting the value or showing the value, passing the value to the component by using this dot state. So here I had two properties, header and content. So I can use it like this dot state dot header and this dot state dot content. So let's see the output of this particular example. For this example, what we can do is that here I am defining a div, and in this div what I'm doing is that I'm doing class component, or you can say creating a class component. And in this, what we have done in index.js, that in index.js I have called this component. This is my component, which is a class-based component. Please remember that while using the state, always you have to create a class component. And just like we use props in this dot props dot attribute name, the same way you can use state just like this dot state dot your attribute name. In this case, your attribute name was header and content. Now let's move to another example where we can see that how you can use state and props in one single example. It's not always the case that you have to use only state. It's not necessary. You can use state and props together also. So we will create this example only, or we can extend this example only. So what we are going to do is that I have a return statement over here where I'm writing, let's say, two more subcomponents. What I'm going to do is that in this div, I have a div over here. I'm going to define two more subcomponents. So my parent component will be app, and then I have two subcomponents, for example, let's say header and the content. So instead of this h1 tag and h2 tag which I have created, what we can do, what I'm saying is that when you create a parent component, so parent component will remain the same, that is app. I can have some child components also where I can pass the attributes or the values as props, which will define that you can use props and you can use at the same time state in one example. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create two you can say components. So let's say one name is header. This is my one of the component, and this is the prop value, the attribute, which I can pass like this dot state dot header, and then I can close this component. And another component I can create is, let's say, component name will be content, and I have a prop. I can pass it as a prop, and then I can write here this dot state dot content. What is the change we have done over here? What we have done is that we have created a class component that will be the parent component. In the render method, in the return statement, it has two child components. So we have to define these child components now. So what we are going to do is that we are going to define these two components now. So let's define these. So what I'm going to write is that I'm going to write class. My component subcomponent name is header. Again, it will be a class component, so it is going to extend from react.component. And the same component I have to create for content. So this content component needs to be defined. So I have two subcomponents now. One subcomponent is the header, which is having the prop value as this dot state dot header, and another prop value as this dot state dot content. So let's define this. Every component should implement a method called render. In render, there needs to be a return statement. Now in this return statement, just like we define h1 tag, I'm going to define this in a div here. So I will say div, and then I will say h1. Now in this h1, what I want to pass is, although the value is coming from a state, but the value which I want to pass over here is in the form of a prop. So what I want is that I will say this dot props dot, in the header props, what is the name of the prop? It's header prop. Similarly, what we are going to do is that in the content subcomponent, again we will have a render method, and then there will be a return statement. In this return statement, what I want is that I want to define a h2 tag, let's take it in a container. That container is, let's say, dev. I want to take it in a container. And in this h2, I want to pass the props. So what is the name of the prop attribute? That is content prop. So what I will say, this dot props dot content prop. Okay. So what we have done over here is that in the previous example, if you remember, that what we did was that we didn't define two subcomponents. Okay. So in place of this, let me copy this somewhere and then can show you. So in place of this, earlier what we did, we didn't define the two subcomponents. What we defined was a container, which was a div, and in this div we had one h1 tag. In this h1 tag, what we were defining, we were directly using the state value. How we were using? State dot header, and then in a h2 tag, what we were doing, we were using the content value. So we were saying this dot state dot content. Now let's see the output of this particular example first, what we have implemented without using the props. So let's save this file and let's go to the browser. So now what it is saying, that header from state and content from state. I have already run the npm start command for this create React application. So you can see the output in localhost on the port 3000. Header from state and content from state. Why this output is coming? Because the header value is header from state and content value is content from state. This was the direct way without using the props. How we have used the props? By using the subcomponent concept. So let's implement this subcomponent. Yeah, now what we are doing is that we have defined two subcomponents, which is header and content. These are the two subcomponents, class-based components, and we have passed the value as props. Now you can see this dot state dot header value will come, and let's say we can write some updated value, new header from state and new container from state, for example, and you can see the value over here, new header from state and new container from state. This is the output. Basically what we have done here is that I have showed you both the ways of using the state in React.js, which means that you can use it without props and you can use it with props also. So there are, you can say, two ways of using state in React.js. But I will recommend that you can use state with props, and if whenever required or whenever you can say apply the props, just go with it. It's not always necessary that you have to implement every time only with the state. You can very well use props and state together in the same application. Now just a few tips of using state in React.js. Just a couple of tips from my side, that do not modify the state directly. Don't even try to modify the state directly. You always use the setState method. And the only place where you can assign this dot state is the constructor. These are the two main things. So what I'm saying over here is that if you have to specify this dot state, where you can specify this dot state, you can specify this dot state in the constructor only. This is the first, you can say, right way to use the state. Now what is the other thing? That state updates may be asynchronous in nature. So React may batch multiple set state calls into a single update for performance. Because this dot props, as we use here this dot state, and here we use this dot props. So this dot props and this dot state may be updated sometimes asynchronously. So you should not rely on their value for calculating the next state. So if you want to set the value of the next state, don't rely on the value of this dot props or this dot state. And the third thing which I want to tell you about state is that state updates are merged. When you call set state, so what happens is that React merges the object you provide into the current state. So these are some of the tips you can say from my side for using state in React.js. So let's come back to this PPT and let's talk about another aspect of React.js, which is lifecycle. Now, what is lifecycle in React.js? Or what is the use of adding lifecycle methods to a class component in React.js? React provides various methods which notifies when certain stage of lifecycle occurs, called lifecycle methods. So there are many methods in React.js which notifies when any stage of a lifecycle occurs. Now what are the different phases of that lifecycle? So it starts with initial phase, then it comes to updating phase, and then props change phase, and finally the unmounting phase, where you can free out some of the resources. So what we are saying is that there are 4 phases in which you can define the life cycle of a particular React.js application. So what happens is that it's very important in the application with many components. Let's say there are 10 components in a React.js application. It becomes very important to free up the resources taken by the components when they are destroyed. So for example, a component is destroyed. So it becomes very crucial, very important to free up the resources which are taken by that component, because once it is destroyed, so the resources which has it consumed should get freed. So that's why we can declare some special methods over the component itself, or you can say we can declare some special methods on the component class to run some code when a component mounts or when a component dismounts. So these methods are basically called the lifecycle methods. Let me give you an example. Component did mount. This is a lifecycle method example. It runs after the component output has been rendered to the DOM. So let's talk about these different lifecycle methods in detail now. So the first phase in the lifecycle of any React.js application is the initial phase. Now what are the different methods available out here? Because in this phase, component is about to make its way towards the DOM. It has not yet reached the DOM. It is just creating its way or about to make its way to the DOM. This phase, you can say, consists of the following methods, which are invoked in a predefined order. So the first method is get default props, get the initial state, component will mount, render method we talk about, and the component did mount. And as I mentioned that component did mount it method runs after the component output has been rendered to the DOM. So different methods, they have their different, you can say, usage in any life cycle of a React.js application. Now if I talk about the second phase, that is, you can say, the updating phase. When it phase comes into picture, so once the component is added to the DOM, because in the previous phase, that was the initial phase, so what we said that we talked about that the component is making its way or it's on its way towards the DOM. But now since it has reached the DOM, it is added to the DOM, they can update and re-render only when a state change occurs. So basically in the updating phase, once the component is added to the DOM, they can update and re-render only when a state change occurs. So this phase consists of the methods, for example, should component update, component will update, render, and component did update. So please remember, render is a common method in almost all the phases or the life cycle of a React.js application. So we have talked about here the initial phase. We have talked about the updating phase. So please remember that neither parent nor the child components can know if a certain component is stateful or stateless. And they should not care whether it is defined as a function or a class. But the most important thing is that when we are dealing with state, our component should be of a class type. It should not be of a function type. So that is why you can say state is often called as local or encapsulated. So it is not accessible to any component other than the one that owns and sets it. A component may choose to pass a state down as props to its child components. Just now we saw the example of the state and props. Now let's talk about the third phase, that is props change phase. So we talked about the initial phase, we talked about the updating phase. Now what happens that after the component has been rendered into the DOM, so in the initial phase what it was doing, it was making its way towards the DOM in the initial phase. In the updating phase what it was doing, that it has been rendered on the DOM. The component has been rendered on the DOM. Now the third phase is props change phase. After the component has been rendered into the DOM, the only other time the component will update apart from the state change is its props value changes. So please remember that through state we can change the value, or through props also we can change the value. Just like we saw that this.props.attribute name, for example, this.props.name, just like that we can say that this.state.attribute value, just like we saw in the previous example. So what we are saying over here is that this.props.attribute name can change, can make the changes in the component, and this.state can also make the changes in the component. Now what are the various methods which get invoked in this particular phase in a predefined order? Component will receive props, should component update, component will update, and component did update. Of course, render is a common method in every phase of the life cycle of a React application. last phase in the life cycle of a React application is the unmounting phase. This is the last phase of the component life cycle in which the component is destroyed and removed from the DOM. This is called unmounting. So we were talking about the mounting and the unmounting. Mounting means when the component is added to the DOM, and unmounting means when the component is removed completely from the DOM. And this phase only consists of one method, no render method over here. The only method which is there in the unmounting phase of a React.js application is component will unmount. Now let's see how the lifecycle goes in a React.js application. So we talked about the initial phase, we talked about the updating phase, we talked about the props change phase, and then we talked about the unmounting phase. So these are some of the methods which are mentioned over here. So it started with the initial phase where we had the method called get default props, then get initial state will be called, component will mount will be called, and then render will be called, and then component did mount will be called. As I mentioned that all these methods always are called in a predefined order. So please remember that if you write a method, let's say for example get default props and component will mount. So you should understand that in which order it will be called. So first of all get default props will be called, and then component will mount will be called. Now you can see on the screen that once this initial phase is done, what we have the other phase that the props can change the state phase, and then we have the update phase where different methods could be called. So what are the different methods? That component will receive props, should component update, component will update, render, and component did update. So these are the different methods in the update phase. Now if I talk about the last phase, which is the unmounting phase, so what happens that React DOM.unmount, we call the component will unmount method for the unmounting phase for completely removing the component from the DOM. That is the last phase, or there is one method which is called over there, which is the component will unmount. Once the component is completely unmounted or destroyed from the DOM, again the lifecycle starts from React DOM.render, and again the get default props methods is called. So that is how this complete lifecycle again goes on and on. Now this is the description of these lifecycle methods which we talked about. So we talked about component will mount, component did mount, and so on. So what happens with component will mount is that it is fired once before initial rendering occurs, and it is a very good place to wire up your message listeners. Please remember that this .setState does not work here. The other method in the lifecycle is component did mount. It is again only fired once in any React.js application. After initial rendering occurs, it can use this.getDOM node. So what is happening over here is that component will mount will always be called before the rendering occurs, and component did mount is fired after the initial rendering occurs. So there is, you can say, a minute difference between component will mount and component did mount. Will means uncertainty, so it is going to render, or the initial rendering has started but it has not been yet rendered on the DOM. And component did mount means it has rendered on the browser or on the DOM. It will be fired once the initial rendering on the DOM occurs. The third method is component will update. It is fired after the component updates are made to the DOM. You can use this.getDOM node for updates over here. The other method is component did update. Now what happens with this method is that it invoked immediately after the component updates are flushed to the DOM. So any change, any update is there in the component, it gets flushed to the DOM, then you can call component did update. And this method is not called for the initial rendering. Please remember, this is very important, that for initial rendering of the React.js component, component did update method is not used. You can use this as an opportunity to operate on the DOM when the component has been updated. So for example, it has been updated using the props or using the state, then only you can use component did update. Component will unmount. We already talked about this, that this is a single method which is called in the unmounting phase of the lifecycle of a React.js application. It is fired immediately before a component is unmounted from the DOM. And it's a very good place to remove message listeners, or you can say general cleanup or garbage collection kind of activities you can do in component unmount method. Another is component will receive props. It is fired when a component is receiving the new props. You might want to use this.setState depending on the props, just like we saw that we can use both props and state in a single application. The other is that should component update. Now this is pretty interesting that this is fired before rendering when new props or state are received. It will return false if you know an update is not needed. So you can check on any of the component based on the state and the props that if any update is required or not, and accordingly you can return false and true based on this method, which is should component update. Now this is very much interesting. Constructor, we talked about constructor, that whenever we are using the class component in React.js, you have to use the constructor, you have to pass the props, and then you have to use a super keyword. Now what is this constructor in props? That if you don't initialize the state and you don't bind the methods, you don't need to implement a constructor for your React component. And ultimately, we already talked about this will be converted into function-based component. But here we are talking about state. So our focus is for class components. Please remember, if you are not binding anything in your component, if you are not using any state, then you don't need a constructor in your class. The constructor for a React component is called before it is mounted. When implementing the constructor for a React component subclass, you should call the super keyword before any other statement. Because if you will not call the super, what will happen that this.props will become undefined in the constructor, which can lead to errors or exceptions or bugs in your application. So that is why it is said that the super keyword should be called before any statement in your React.js application. So first you have to call the constructor and then you have to call the super keyword so that this.props should not become undefined. So what we are saying is that typically in React, class-based React component, you can say constructors are only used for two purposes specifically. It is used for, you can say, initializing the local state, or you can say initializing the initial state by assigning an object to this.state. And then what we are saying is that for binding the various events or binding the event handler methods to an instance of the class, you need the constructor. Please remember, these are the two basic purpose of using constructor. So if you want to set the initial state, that will be done in the constructor. If you want to, you can say, bind event handler methods to the class instance, that will be done in the constructor of the class. Now this is just a, you can say, pictorial representation of the different phases. Now if I talk about the life cycle of any React application, it revolves around the three important phases: mounting, updating, and unmounting. So what we are saying that first you add the component to the DOM, you do some changes or updates, and then finally you unmount it. So what are the different methods which are shown on the screen? You can see that what are the different methods we generally use while mounting, updating, and unmounting. So in the mounting, we place the constructor. We can call the method called component.mount. And then when it comes to updating phase, we can use three different types of methods: new props for get derived state from props or should component update. We can use this.setState and we can use this.force update. And the different methods which we can use in the updating phase is component.didUpdate. And finally, in the unmounting phase, there is only one method which we can use, which is component.will_unmount. So this is just a representation, you can say summarized way of representation of the life cycle of a React component. So we talked about till here JSX, we talked about components, props, states, and lifecycle. Now another important aspect, you can say a very important fundamental of React.js is events. So what are events? Events are the, you can say, triggered reactions to specific actions. So for example, we can have on-click event, we can have mouse click, we can have mouse hover, key press. All these are called events in React.js. So for example, there is an action. So some action happened on the React component, and then we have a React application which is called an event. Now some event has happened on the React component and it becomes a reaction. So that is the definition of events. Now first we talk about that how the concept of event work in other UIs as compared to React.js, and then we will talk about that how events work in React.js. Let's say I have a control, let's say 3 controls or many controls, button type of control. Now what happens that in other UIs, on every control you have to implement an event listener and a corresponding event handler. This is very much required, which decreases the performance of the application on the DOM. Because what is happening over here is that for different controls, just like shown over here that you have a different controls, different buttons, or maybe another controls, you have to implement the event listener on every control. And when an event listener is implemented, a corresponding event handler will be required. So that is how the different UIs or other UIs work when it comes to events. Now let's talk about events in React, how React manages events in React. So what happens is that if you have different controls, then you will have only one event listener and one event handler attached to it. So which increases ultimately the performance of React.js application. Please remember that React events are named using camel casing rather than lowercase. So you have to define events, or you can handle the events with camel case only. And with JSX, you can pass a function as the event handler rather than a string. So we will see that in the demo. So before moving to refs, now the other fundamental of React.js, let's see some of the demo of handling events in React.js. So for that, I'm going to show you an example. We have talked about state, we have talked about props and JSX and all that stuff. So this is just you can say playground which I generally use to work with React.js, which is CodePen.io. So in this particular example, what I've done is that I am using a conditional rendering based on my click, or you can say based on my event. So we'll start from React DOM.render. So this is the React DOM.render, which is calling a parent component, which is login control. Now, if I go to login control, which is a component, now in the login control, it is a class-based component, which is extending from React.component. Now, every class component, if it is binding something or setting the state, it should have a constructor. It should have a super keyword so that this .prop should not become undefined. Now here you can see that I have defined two event handlers for binding in the constructor of the class. One is handle login click and handle logout click. I am binding it over there and setting the initial state that is logged in is false. So initial state is logged in is false, that the user is not logged in as of now. That is why you can see that it is saying in the output that please sign up and showing me the button of login. What is happening in handle login click and handle logout click we'll see later. First we will see the render method implementation. In the render method, I have declared a constant is logged in equal to this.state.is logged in. Now what will be the value in this, because it is initially set to true. You can see here initially set to it is false, and then in the events what I'm doing is I'm setting it true or false. So first of all it will take the initial value. I'm taking a let button, and if is logged in, if it is true, then this button will be called, where I'm calling a component called logout button. And if it is false, then I'm calling another component which is again login button. If it is true, then logout button. If it is false, it is login button. Now you see over here on click. This is called event in React.js. On click is an event. This event listener is bounded to an event handler. So this is binded to an event handler, which is handle logout click, and this is on click event is binded to an event handler which is called handle login click. So we'll see what is happening in handle login click and handle logout click. In handle login click we are setting the state and we are setting it to true, and in the handle logout again the user will be logged out, so we are saying that is logged in is false. So let's see the implementation. So what is happening, that if I click on login, it is showing me the message welcome back. You can see on the screen. So function user greeting is called welcome back, and when I'm clicking on the button again log out, it is saying me please sign in. You can see over here please sign up. So what is happening is that in the login button and logout button, so I have two function components, login button and logout button. So what I'm doing is that I'm again calling the event, that is on click equal to props.onClick. And in the greeting method, what I'm checking is that if it is logged in, then it will return another component user greeting, which is again a function component. And then if it is logged out, then it will say guest greeting again, which is a function component. So that is how you can use events in React.js. Now let's see another example of using events in React.js. So what we can do is that we have to start from React DOM.render. In the React DOM.render, what we are doing, that we are calling a component which is toggle. So this will become my parent component. Now in this toggle, what I'm doing is that I'm writing the constructor that is very much required for a class component, because I'm setting the state. Then there is a super keyword. In the this.state, I am defining a property is lockdown true. So is toggle on property is always true. And I'm binding an event this dot handle click. So this dot handle click dot bind to this particular class. And in this handle click event, what I'm doing is, because I have used a button, on the button I am calling an event. Now what is the event? On click. On click event, what I'm doing, this dot handle click. And in this, what I'm saying is, does this dot state dot is toggle on? What will be the text of the button? So when I will click, if it is true, it will be on. If it is false, the text will be off. So let's see the output. If I click on this button, the text becomes off. If I again click on it, the text becomes on. So this is just a text of the particular button which we are changing based on the state. So this dot state dot is toggle on. So what we have done is that we have set the initial state first of all. Initial state is true. So whenever it will be true, this dot state dot is toggle on. Whenever it will be true, the text shown is on. Now once I click on it, now that this dot state dot is toggle on becomes false. And whenever it becomes false, the text is shown as off. So that is how we can work with the basic, all the fundamentals we can apply in one application. It's not like that in React.js that you have to come up with only JSX based application or component based application. It's not like that. All the React fundamentals which we talked about over here should be used every time in combination. Then only you can learn React.js in detail. So what I'm saying is that you can apply JSX, components, props, state, and then lifecycle methods and some kind of events, for example, on-click events, just we saw. All these things you can combine in one React application. So let's see more examples of events. So what I'm doing here is, let me remove everything from here. Okay. So let's create a parent component app for a very simple example of the events. So what I'm writing over here is that class app extends react.component. I have to define a constructor. The constructor I have to define props. I have to use the super keyword so that this dot props does not become undefined. So what I want to do is that I want to set the initial state with this dot state, and then I can use here this dot update state also. So update state will be my handler, and I can define the update state. So what I'm doing is that this dot update state dot bind, and I want to bind this to this particular class. Let's remove all this. Okay. So let me copy this particular toggle example from here. So what I want to do is, so in this particular index.js, let me define this toggle. So what we have done is that we have defined the same component toggle over here. And in this toggle, what we have done is that we have implemented a constructor, as I told you. Okay. And then in the constructor, what we have done that we have binded an event, and initial value of the toggle is true. And then the final value on the click of the, you can say, button, I am setting the state as this dot set state, where I'm changing the value called is toggle on from true to false. Now let's talk about child events. What is the concept of child event in React.js? So when we need to update the state of the parent component from its child. So generally what we have learned till here is that you can update the child event from the parent. But there could be some situations when you need to update the state of the parent component from below, that is from the child. So we can create an event handler, for example, let's say update state in the parent component, and you can pass it as a prop to the child component where we can just call it. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do is, let's index.js, go back to index.js, and let's define a component with the name called app. And in the app.js, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define a class component with the name app, which extends from react.component. So this is my class component which I have defined. Now in this, I have to define the constructor with the props. And in this constructor, I have to define the super keyword so that this dot prop should become undefined. Now, in this super, we have to, let's say, define, for example, I have to define initial state. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say this dot state is equal to, so I have to define a property. Property could be, let's say, data, and I have to define some data over here. Let's say I say it to initial data. This is my initial data. So my constructor is done now. I can write here, let's say, for example, end of class. This is just my end of constructor so that you can understand well. Now, let's bind a method to this constructor. If you want to bind a method, you have to bind it inside the constructor, please remember. So let's say I want to call update state. This is just a method name. You can use any one of your choice, any name. This dot update state, how you bind it? You bind it using the keyword bind and this. So by this statement, what you say, because you have to define this inside the constructor, by this you are binding a method which is called update state, and we are defining now the update state. This is a method we are defining, and in this update state, what we can do, we can set the state. Now what state you have to set? So you are going to set the value of, let's say, data, because that is the property you define. And let's say what we want to do is that data, for example, updated from the child component, something like that. Could be of any text, no problem at all. So this is the end of the update state method. Now you have to implement always a render method. Now once you have implemented a render method, it should have a return statement. So we are using a return statement over here. So this is my end of render method, and this is, let's say, end of return statement. Okay. Now in this return, what I want to do is that let's say create a container. So my container is div, and in this particular thing, what I want to do is I want to define a sub component, because in this particular demo, what I'm going to show you that how you can update the state of the parent component from a child component. So I need to have a child component over here. So I'm going to define a child component, which is, let's say, name is content, and I'm just taking a prop value over here with the attribute my data prop, and I'm saying value of the initial value of the state is this dot state, my attribute name is data. And then what I'm saying is another prop I'm using is update. This is the another prop. You can use multiple props, multiple attributes, and I'm saying is this dot update state. So what I have done is that I want to update the state of the parent component. My parent component in this case is app, and I want to update the state from a child component, which is the content. So this class is over here, and then I want to define a sub component, a child component, because we have not defined it yet. So I will write class content. My component name, child component name is content. So I have to define over here. So I'm saying class content extends react.component, and what I'm going to define here is implement a render method, and in this render method I will have a return statement. That's it. Now in this return statement, what I want is, let's say I have a container, a div again, and for example, let's say I want to add a button, and button will have, let's say, on click event, and on the on click event I want to call the props. So what is the props attribute I want to call? This dot props dot the update state prop. Update state prop I want to call. This button is closed, and let's say the name of the button is, as of now, give it click. Now one more HTML tag. Let's add one more HTML tag to use the another prop attribute, and that is this dot props dot my data prop. That's it. Let me tell you that what we have done in this, that in React.js, when we need to update the state of the parent component from the child component. So here you can see on the screen that I have created here two components. One is the parent component, which is the app component, and another is the child component. Now what happens is that what you can do is that you can update the state of a parent component from its child. Generally what happens in a general scenario that a parent component updates the state of a child component, but in this particular example, what I'm going to show you that how you can update the state of a parent component from a child component. So what I have done is that I have created a event handler update state in the parent component. You can see that this particular event handler, this is created in the parent component, but it is passed as a prop to the child component. You can see over here, this particular event handler is passed as a prop to the child component. So let's see the output of this. I'm saving this. I'm just clicking, and when I clicked it, the button was there in my child component. You can see the state has been changed and it is saying that the data has been updated from the child component. You can see over here, which means that the event handler which we created in the parent component can be passed as a prop. So one good learning from this particular example we can get that the event handler which you are creating can also be passed as a prop, and that prop can be used in another subcomponent or child component. Now another thing which I want to tell you that how you can prevent component from rendering. For example, there could be cases where you don't want to render a component or you don't want to hide a component. All these are rare cases, but in rare cases you might want a component to hide itself even though it was rendered by some another component. So for that what we do generally is that we return null instead of its rendered output. That is the only trick by which we can prevent a component to render on the DOM, that you can return null instead of its rendered output. Now what we will do is that we can see the component events, that how events are created in components. So this I have already shown you. Let's go back to the slide now and let's talk about some other fundamentals. So refs. Now we will talk about refs. What is a ref in React.js? So ref stands for references. You can say ref provide a way to access DOM nodes or React elements created in the render method. This is the definition of refs. So what I'm saying is that ref stands for references, and they are used to return the references to a particular element, or you can say component returned by the render. So if I have a React element having a render method, I have to place some reference in my component. So by using the ref keyword, I can place a reference to that particular component in React.js. So what happens that in the typical React data flow, props are the only way that parent component interact with their children. So what we have seen is that in React.js, probably if you want to pass the data or you want to flow the data from parent to the child, props are the only way. To modify a child, you re-render it with new props. However, there are few cases where you need to, you can say, imperatively modify a child outside of the typical data flow. So the child to be modified could be an instance of the React component, or it could be a DOM element. So for both these cases, React provides an escape hatch, you can say, and which are called refs. Now the important thing is that when to use refs. So there are particular cases, you can say few good use cases for using refs. Those are, you can manage the focus, you can manage the text selection, or you want to apply a media playback. There you can apply the refs. You can apply the refs in application where you triggering imperative animations, or you are integrating with third-party DOM libraries. Probably there you can use very well refs. So important thing is that avoid using refs for anything that can be done declaratively. Now how you create the refs? Refs are created using react.createRef method, and they are attached to a React element via the ref attribute. So ref is an attribute. Refs are commonly assigned to an instance property when a component is constructed, so they can be referenced throughout the component. So this is very much important about React ref. Now if I show you that how you can use the refs, so let me go back to the same example. Now ref is used to return a reference to the element. This we have already know now what are the React refs. Although I will recommend that ref should be avoided in most of the cases. However, they can be useful when we need DOM measurements or to add methods to the components. So we will see now that how you can use refs. In this example, I'm going to show you that how you can use refs to clear the input field. Okay. So let's remove everything. We have a constructor props, this dot state. Let's remove this method. And let's remove this render. Remove this class. Okay. So we are using the same app component. What we are going to do is that we have a constructor with a props keyword and the super keyword with props. We have the initial state called this dot state, having, let's say, for example, some blank data in this case. And then you have this dot update state equal to this dot update state dot bind. And let's have one more, you can say, handler, event handler, which says this dot clear input equal to this dot clear input dot bind this. This constructor is closed over here. Let me save this file. And then I'm going to define this update state. Update state event handler we have to define. So I'm writing here update state. Let's pass an argument to it. And then I'm setting the state as, so this dot set state. What is the value of the property? The value of the property I have to define over here. Okay, the value of the property is data. And in this data, what I'm doing is data value should be e dot target dot value. So we have defined the update state also, that whatever value will be the input will become the set state value. Now we have to define another method. That another method is clear input. So let's copy and paste over here. I have to define the clear input method now. In this, what I'm saying is this dot, again I have to set the state. So I'm setting the state, same value I have to use, and that is data. So I am making it again blank. And after that, I am finding the DOM. So how you can find the DOM in React.js is React DOM dot. You have a method, or you can say function called find DOM node. So I want to find the DOM node. And how can I find the DOM node? I can find it using ref. So what I'm saying is this dot refs. I'm just taking an input value. That is my input text box, which I'm going to define in the render method. What I will do that I will use the focus method for this. This is my clear input function. And finally, we have the render method implement for the class. And in this render method, you have to apply the return statement. The return statement, we are going to write some HTML or JSX. So I'm creating first of all the container. My container is div. I'm taking an input type, value equal to this dot state dot data. So that will be the blank value, initial value. This dot state dot data. I am taking an event over here on change. So whenever there will be a change in the text box, this method or this event will be called. And in this, I am calling this dot update state. And I'm also defining the ref, which is very important. Ref is, which I have defined here, my input. So on my input, the ref will work. So this input is defined. So this text box is defined. And now I will have a button control where on click event needs to be defined. So I'm defining the on click event. The name of the button is clear. So on click, what I want to do is that I want to call a binded method, which is this dot clear input. And after that, simply I want to place a h4 tag. In this h4 tag, I will show the final state value by using this dot final value. How can I show that? This dot state dot data. So this completes my explanation of the refs, where what we have done is that we have created a component called app. In this particular component, what we are doing is that we are setting the initial state with a blank value. And I have called two event handlers. You can say this dot update state and this dot clear input. Now in the update state, I'm setting the value, what is taken as an input from the user in a, you can say, text box. And then in the clear input, what I'm doing is that whenever this clear input will be called, I'm setting again the value to be blank. But in this case, what I'm doing is that I'm making a focus by using the ref on that particular text box control, or you can say input control. Now in the return statement in the render method, I have taken a text box, or you can say input control, which is have some value. Then there will be a button. So let's see the output of this particular application. So if I write, let's say Vipul, and I click on clear, you can see it has been completely cleared from here. So that is how you can use ref in React.js. Okay, now we'll talk about example, or you can say a demo, a project where the concept which we have studied till now are, let me repeat one thing, JSX, we talked about components, props, state, lifecycle, events, and wraps. So out of this 8 important fundamentals of React.js, we have already talked about the 7 important aspects. But before moving to the last React.js fundamental, that is keys, that how you can use keys in React.js, let me walk you through a very good example, or you can say a small project. So the project requirement starts with this particular, you can say, example. So in this example, what you can see is that you have to implement a search functionality where users can search from this particular text box, and whatever they are going to search it will be visible on the screen with that search result or that search keyword. Now, what should be the approach of yours to implement this kind of React.js application? Now, what is the step 1? My recommendation is that you break the UI into different components, or you can say component hierarchy. When I say component hierarchy, what does it mean? That you break the complete UI, because React.js is all about UI. So you break the complete hierarchy into components, component hierarchy, which means that there will be a parent component, there could be child or subcomponents, and there could be subcomponents. So first thing first, what you want to do, that you will want to do is to draw boxes around every component. So in this particular example, what I've done is that I have created different colored boxes around every component and subcomponent, and I have given them some names also. But the problem is that how do you know what should be its own component? Okay, so by coloring this particular example, we can see that there are 5 components in this very simple application. It's a very simple application where there could be 5 components. So one component, you can see this outer boundary of orange color. So let's say I call this as filterable product table, which contains the entirety of the example. Now there is a search bar. This could be my second component in the blue color, the blue boundary you can see. It receives the user input. Now there is a product table. You can see the green boundary. This is my third component. This is called, let's say, the product table, which displays and filters the data collection based on user input. Now another is product category row. You can see here the cyan color, sporting goods and electronics. This is my product category row, which displays a heading for each category. This is my fourth component. And the final component is the product row, which is in the red color, which displays a row for each product. So now we have identified the components in this particular example. Now if I want to arrange them into hierarchy, because components that appear within the another component should appear as a child in this particular hierarchy. So what should be my hierarchy? The hierarchy to break this component, the particular UI, is at the top I will have a filterable product table. Then there will be 2 subcomponents, search bar and the product table. And in the product table, I have product category row and the product row. So that is how we can build any React.js application. Now let's build a static version of this in React. Okay, by creating, you can say, different components. So just want to add one thing, that if you want to make your UI very much interactive, you need to able to trigger changes to your underlying data model. And we are going to use it because this particular application can be made easy with the help of state. What is our state? The search text the user has entered, this is the state, and the value of this checkbox, because I have added a checkbox also over here. So let's create this particular example in React.js application. So before creating this, I have a sample data, you can say a mock data, which can be used for this particular example. So let's start creating this particular application in React.js. So I'm just removing all the stuff from here. Let's create this example and see how it works while using in React.js. So let me close this and I'm going to open a new instance. So I'm going to open it in Visual Studio Code, or else what we can do is we can try this example over here. Okay, so what we are going to do is now that we are going to see that search example in this particular demo. So in this particular example, we talked about that we will divide the complete UI or complete example into 5 different components. So let's write those components in the create React app application. So for that, I have a dummy data. In this dummy data, what I'm going to do is first I have to create a class component. The outermost, that is the orange one, for example, let's say filterable product with the name filterable product, and I'm writing extends react.component. So this will be my parent component. Out of the 5 components, this will be my parent component. So I'm just writing the constructor for this class. Please remember all the initial state and binding of the methods needs to be done always in the constructor only. So once this is done, I am initializing or setting the initial state by using this.state. You can always use this.state and can apply the properties. So what are the properties I want to use? The properties which I want to use is, for example, let's say filter text having initial value, let's say blank. And another property which I want to use is in stock only. I want to check whether the products are there in the stock or not. Initial value, let's say false. Now, what are the different methods which I want to bind? The methods which I want to bind is, for example, let's say this dot handle filter text change. This is just a, you can say, name of the event. I have to bind it to the class. So I will say this dot handle filter text change dot bind to this. And after that, what I will say, this dot handle another event handler I want to bind to this particular class. Please remember, all this needs to be done inside the constructor only. I don't want handle filter text change. I want this time handle stock change, and I want to bind it. That's it. So we have defined the constructor. We have defined 2, or you can say we have binded 2 methods. Now it's time to define them. So first one is handle filter text change, and another is handle in stock change. So these are the 2 methods which we are going to define now. And after that, once these are defined, the final thing is that you have to implement a render method for this particular class. So first set the final state in this. So this dot set state, and there will be this dot set state. So in the handle filter text change, so whenever there will be a text change, I want to set the final state. So handle filter text change, I am going to pass text property, and then I am going to set the state. So with which value I will say that filter text will be whatever be the value of the filter text. Now the second method which I want to bind is handle in stock change. So I will have another property for it, that is in stock only. And in the this.set state, what I want to do is I want to set the final value of this particular property, which is in stock only. So I will say in stock only, the property will be whatever be passed to it. That's it. So I'm done with binding the events in the constructor, setting the initial state, and setting the final state in the 2 event handlers. Now the final thing is to implement the render method. So in the render method, I will have return statement. So let's close this return. And in this return, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define first of all a container. Let's say I've defined a container. Now the important thing in this container, what I'm going to do is, as I mentioned, that I have total 5 components. In this particular search example, I have 5 components to be defined. And this is the first component on which I am working. So what will be the other subcomponents? Other subcomponents, let's say, is the search bar, and another component could be the product table. So you can see on the image that there is a blue boundary for the search bar component and there is a green boundary for the product component. So let's create those or call those components. So search bar, I'm saying that filter text, what will be my filter text? It will be this dot state dot filter text. Now I can define more, you can say, properties or the values which are available in the initial state. What are those values which are available in the initial state? I have, let's say, in stock only. I can define the in stock only over here. What I will say this dot state dot in stock only. And then on filter text change, what I can do is that I can call my handler. What is my handler? My handler is this dot handle filter text change, and on in stock change I can again call a handler which is this dot handle in stock change. So that is how you can define a search bar component. So this is one of the component which is defined, or you can say the sub component which is defined over here. The another component which I want to define is product table. So another component which I want to define is product table. Now why product table? If you see in this particular example, this green one is the product table component and the blue one is the search component. So what we have done is, let me repeat once again, that I have divided this complete application, this complete project into 5 components. So the first component is the first one, that is filterable product table. The second one is the search bar and the another one is the product table. So we are as of now just calling the product table component subcomponent. So let me define some properties for it. For example, let's say products. What will be my products? So I will say this dot props, which I'm going to define, this dot props dot products. So I have to define much more values for it. One is products. So another, let's say I want to define what is the filter text. In this case, filter text will be again same. This will be this dot state dot filter text. And then I want to define one more property for this component, that is in stock only. What will be the value of this in stock only? The value of this in stock only will be this dot state dot in stock only. So that is how we have defined our another subcomponent, which is product table. Now as you can see how we are modularizing this particular code. So first of all, we are calling this filter product table. In this filter product table, this is the main component. We are calling 2 subcomponents, which is search bar and the product table. So this is the main component, and let's define the main calling, that is React DOM dot render. And this in this React DOM dot render, what we are going to say? We are going to say that we are calling the parent component. What is the name of my parent component? It's filterable product table. I am going to call it, and I am going to call it on a prop. What is my prop? Now prop is the values, the JSON data which I have already defined. My prop value will be equal to products. So I will say React DOM dot render prop value products equal to products. So just I have to close this first, and in fact I can close it with closing tag, and then I will say document dot get element by ID, the ID which I have to define where I want to render my output. That's it. So we have called the parent component by using React.render. Here we are passing the props as products, which is my sample JSON data. This is the sample JSON data, the category of the product, the name of the product, and what is its price. So filterable product table is the first component which we have created, which is our base component, or you can say parent component. Now the other components which we are going to create is the search bar, which is the sub component, and the product table component. So let's start creating those components as well. So what we are going to say is class name of the component is search bar. So the name of the component is search bar, which extends from React.component. So this is my another component, and one more component which I will have which is again a sub-components you can see, which we have created is a product table. So we can just write here class product table extends from react.component. So you can see we have also created these two sub-components, which is the search bar and the product table. Now let's focus on the search bar, that how we are going to implement the search bar component. So in the search bar component, the same thing, we are going to first write the constructor, and in this constructor I am going to define the props. Once this is done, I am going to call the super keyword, which will have again props. So this we have done now multiple times, and if you want to bind some event over here in the search bar, then you can bind it over here itself. So what I'm saying, let's say I want to bind couple of events over here, so I will say handle filter text change, handle filter text change. So let's say this dot handle filter text change dot bind to this, and I want to have one more event handler, which is handle in stock. I want to check whether it's in stock or not. So I will say this dot handle in stock dot bind and this. So that is how I have defined the constructor. Once I define the constructor, I have to write a definition of these events which I have written. So first of all, handle filter text change. So this is the handle filter text change, and the another one is I want to have handle in stock change. So let's write handle in stock change. Now in the handle filter text change, what I want is this dot, because I have the props. So on filter text change, I want to pass the value which is written by the user in the text box. So e dot target dot value. This is the value which is written by the user in the search, and in the handle in stock change, what I will say that this dot props dot on in stock change, what I'm going to write is that e dot target, whether we will check that checkbox is checked or not. Now once this is done, we will implement the render method for this particular component. So I will say render, and then I will have a return statement which will allow me to write the JSX for this particular class. So let's say I use a form element of HTML, and then I want to implement a text box kind of functionality. So for implementing this text box kind of functionality, I am using input type will be equal to text, placeholder for this input, let's say equal to search, just a custom text you can say. Now what will be the value? This is something very important, that what value we want. So this dot props, what is the text which user has written, this dot filter text, and what I want as an event. I want an event on change, whenever the value will change, what I want to call. So I want to call this dot handle filter text change. That's it. So my input is defined. I want to, let's take a p tag for example. In this p tag, what I'm going to do is, again I'm to take input type. Now this time it will be of type checkbox, because in this example you see I have a requirement of implementing a text box, and then I want to implement a checkbox. Okay, so I will say that this is of type checkbox. Checked, I will check whether it is checked or not. So I will say checked equal to this dot props dot in stock only, whether it is in stock or not, and on change, if there will be a change event, on change I want to call this dot handle in stock change. So that's it. And once this is done, I want to, let's say for example, give some space, and I want to write some text that only show products in stock just after the checkbox, just like in this example. In this particular example, you can see in the requirement that I want to show some static text that only show products in the stock. So I have written only show products in the stock. So that is how it completes the search bar component. So we have written the two components as of now, and now I am going to write the product table component. Now this component is again very important, because in this component we are going to define two sub components more. So this is our third component which I am going to write. And after that, in this particular component, I'm going to call two small subcomponents. So let me define those components very quickly. What will happen, you will understand what we are doing. So what I'm doing is that I will define a very small components. For example, let's say product category row. So I will say product category row extends from react.component. This will be my one subcomponent for this product table component, and another would be class product row. This will be again a component, so extends from react.component. That's it. So we have to define these three components, and our example or this complete project React.js application will be over. So what I'm going to do is first I will define this product table. So render method, which is an implementation of the class. And in this render method, what I'm going to do is that I will say define some constants. So what is the filter text? Filter text is this dot props dot filter text, and I'm going to define the stock value with in stock only, which will be this dot props dot in stock only. Once this is done, I'm going to define an array of the rows. So array of the rows, for example, I will define with const rows equal to an array. I've defined an array, and let's say one define the last category so that I have that how many categories are there. Let's define it null as of now. Now what I'm saying that this dot props dot products, because products I'm passing it as a prop, and it is, you can say, JSON array. So I can apply for each over here. So what I'm saying for each, because on an array you can apply the for each. So in this case, I'm applying the for each, and I'm on which quantity I want to apply the for each. I want to apply on a variable, let's say for example product, and want to apply a arrow function. That's it. And I will write some conditions over here that index of filter text, whether it's in stock or not, and so on. I will write some of the values over here. I will create a structure, and before that, what I can do is that I can define this product category row. So let's define this product category row. So I'm saying render. Now in this render method, I'm defining a constant, that is category is equal to this dot props dot category, and there will be a return statement for this. Now in this return statement, I'm just using a tr structure. For example, in this tr I'm defining a header with a th, and let's say some call span. If I can give some call span, yes, I can define a call span. And what I'm saying is that in this th, that is the table head, I want to define the category. So you can see here that this category is defined as sporting goods or electronics. So I want to define n as header. That kind of functionality I want to implement. So this product category we have already defined, where we are displaying the category. Now comes the product row. Now in this product row, what we are going to define. So in this product row, what all I want is that I want the product, maybe the product name, whether the product stocked or not. At the same time, I want the price, the product price. So what I will say that I want the product name, I want the product price. Okay. So let me do this, and let me show you the example now. So we have defined the product category and product row. Now you can see over here the product table. We were writing the product table where product.name.index of filter text equal to -1. We are just comparing whether it is in the stock or not. If it is there in the stock, we are pushing it to the rows array. So you can see here different rows. So we are pushing the values in the rows, and then we are declaring two subcomponents, product category row and product row, in which we have defined the category, which will be the category header, and then we have defined the product row individual, where we are saying that we are using the product name, and then we are also displaying the product price. As you can see in this example, that you have to define the product name and you have to define the product price. Okay, so this completes our demo of using this search example. Let me save this and open it on the screen. Okay, npm start, this is running. So just a minute. In the app.js, I have nothing. In the index.js, I have this search example. And in the React DOM.render, I am calling this root. Everything is in place. It should show up now. We refresh it. Okay, now it is showing up. So this is the output of this particular example. We have implemented the 5 components as shown in this particular example. So let's check the output now. Let's say if I want to search for football, it is giving me the result for football only, correct? And now if I want to remove this football from the search component, it is showing me all the results, or you can say all the products with their prices. If I check this checkbox, which is only show products in stock, and the products which are in trade are not in stock, so it will hide those products which are not in stock for me. And if I uncheck this checkbox, it is showing me all the products, whether they are in stock or not. So this is, you can say, a demo which I have shown you of the complete React.js fundamentals, where you have used state, where we have used props, we have created the components, 5 components we have created. So for example, let's search Nexus 7, which is in another category. It is giving me the result of Nexus 7 along with the product name and the product price. So that is how we can create a very beautiful applications in React.js by decomposing the complete UI into different components. This is the beauty of React.js, you can say. Okay. So now we will finally talk about the final React.js fundamental, that is keys. So what are keys in React.js? So let's talk about the keys now. So if I talk about keys, keys are the elements, you can say, which helps React to identify the components uniquely. So for example, if I have an ordered list where I have some allies, I have an unordered list UL where I have some of the allies. So I can define the keys on them so that those React elements can be identified very much uniquely. So basically I can say that keys are the elements which helps React to identify the components uniquely. So on the screen you can see that I have 2 React elements which is having 2 render methods, but they are uniquely identified by different keys. So for one of them I am using the key as 101, and for another I am using the key as 102. So you can say that keys are the basically things which helps us to identify the components uniquely. Now you can see here that if any of the key is changed, again I can check which key has been changed. So keys, again I'll repeat that these are the elements only which are applied on React elements specifically, and they help React to identify the components uniquely. Okay. So we'll see the example of keys now, that how we can use keys in React applications. This is an example where I have used the concept of keys just to let you understand that how we can use the keys in React.js and how they help us to uniquely identify the components in React.js. So in this particular example, you can see that there is an array I have created, const numbers, number array with 5 values, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, starting from the index 0, obviously, because it's an array. Now React DOM.render. This is the first method which is called. In this, a component is called, which is the number list. So number list is a component, and then there are props which is used called numbers, and this numbers will have this array values, and then document.getElementById. by ID. Now let's talk about this number list component. Now this is a function based component. So function number list. Now as you can see over here that I don't need any state, I don't need any constructor. That's why I have no event which is getting binded. That's why no constructor, no super keyword is used. So in the function component, that is number list, this props is passed. So numbers is props.numbers, because this numbers will be taken in the props. Now list items, numbers.map. Again, map is a very important, you can say, function when it comes to array or to iterate on the array values. Please remember, you can use the map function. This is a predefined function in jQuery and JavaScript used for arrays, where you can iterate through the different value of the arrays. So numbers.map, number is just a key, you can say. Now list item. Now list item is again a subcomponent. Here I am using the key, which is number.toString. So I will have the key as 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 and value equal to number. Now in the function list item, what I want to return is, I want to return a list of allies having the props.value. So whatever will be the value in the number, that will be shown as li, but all these will be identified uniquely. So if I go to inspect element, I'm just showing you that how you can see here. So this is a ul and this is the li structure which you can see over here. So all these li structure is defined, or you can say identified uniquely with this key value. So what will be the key value in this case? That key value will be 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. Okay, so that is how we can define the key on the component, or in fact you can also define the keys directly on, you can say, the HTML tag, for example li. So one more example, if we'll see for the keys, the same example which I have shown, but in this case this is a very important thing to understand, that when you are returning a ul and then you are returning the list items from the list item component. This is very important to understand over here, that how you are returning this ul and li structure in the output. On the right hand side you can see the output. The important thing is that we have created here two function components. Two function components are, one is the number list, which is the main component called from React DOM.render, and in this number list I am calling another sub child or sub component, which is again a function component called function list item. So function list item, I'm passing the props, I'm returning the li structure from here, and I'm also returning a ul structure from where the list items will be shown. So what are the list item will be shown? Whatever the number which are there in my array, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So all these numbers will be shown on the screen as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's come back to the PPT again. So we talked about keys. So basically we have talked about now all the React.js fundamentals. I will just again repeat very quickly for you that what all fundamentals we have talked about. We talked about JSX, components, props, state, lifecycle, events, refs, and finally we talked about keys. So these are all the basic fundamentals of React.js, and we have seen very good demos based on these topics. One last example, or you can say final demo based on these concepts and specifically on lifecycle methods, which I want to show you. I'm going to show you that, and then we'll start with the advanced concept of React.js, that is Flux and Redux. So I'll talk about what is Flux and what is Redux in detail. But before that, let me show you a very good example where we will be using the lifecycle methods, and I will show you how we can use the lifecycle methods while working with React.js. So again, I have came back to the same example. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm just commenting this particular code so that there is no confusion. Let's check the output. It should show us nothing now. Okay, that's great. It's blank because we have not written anything. We have commented the complete code. Okay, great. So let's write a fresh code now. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to show you a clock example which will completely show you the date and time. But here I'm going to use the lifecycle methods which I've shown you in the different phases. So one of those methods I'm going to use is component did mount and component will mount. Okay, so let's get started. I'm creating a component. So I'm writing class clock extends from react.component, just like we are writing every time. But before completing this class component, I want to write which is going to render on the browser or on the DOM. So react DOM.render. What I want to show, I want to show this clock component. So component should be always in the curly braces, and then I have document.getElementById where I want to render the output. So this is done. So we are sure that the first component or the parent component which will be called is the clock component. That's why I have written the react DOM.render in the first place. So first thing first. So since this is a class component, I need to have a constructor, and then in the constructor I want to define the super keyword so that this .props does not become undefined. And then if I want to set the initial state, so I have to set it in the constructor itself. So I am saying this .state, this is my initial state which I am setting. So I am saying what is the date. So I am saying it, let's say new date. So I have defined the constructor. Now outside the constructor, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to define a method called, let's say, tick, which is going to work as a ticker, nothing else. So in this tick, I'm going to set the state. So I will say this dot set state, and what I am going to set the same state of the same property date with the new date. So I have set the state now in the tick method. We'll call the tick method later. And now I'm going to define two lifecycle methods. First of them is component did mount. So IntelliSense is helping me over here. Component did mount, and next I want to call is component will unmount. So again IntelliSense, I can use the IntelliSense. Great. So in the component did mount, what we are going to do is that we will define a property. Let's say this dot, for example, timer ID equal to, I'm going to define a predefined method called set interval. In this set interval, what I want to set is, I want to define arrow function, and that arrow function is, let's say, this dot tick, and I have to define the range for set interval. Now in component will unmount, since I have to unmount the component, I have to destroy the component from the DOM. I will write clear interval, again a predefined one, and in this I am going to pass this dot timer ID. So that is how we can define the lifecycle methods. Now once these lifecycle methods have been defined, what I'm going to do is default method which needs to be implemented as a part of the class is render. In this render, I will implement this return statement. Okay. Now in this return statement, what I'm going to write is that, let's have a container. So dev is my container. I will write some h1 statement. Example, let's say Edureka React.js full course by Vipul Jain. And then in h2 tag, another tag I want to take. In the h2 tag, what I will write that it is, maybe with the time probably, I want to say this dot state dot date. Maybe I want to convert it probably to local time string. So I can convert it to local time string, and I can place full stop also over here. So you can see the output that it is showing the output Edureka React.js full course by Vipul Jain. It is 11:29 and 50 PM. So that is how you can use the lifecycle methods in React.js application. And we have set the interval with 1 second. So that's why every time you can say the seconds value are getting changed. So I will again repeat this, that what I have done in this. What I have done in this is that I have set the clock component. In the clock component, this is my parent component. And since this is the parent component, what I have done is that I have set the initial state. And in the tick method, I have set the final state. Now in the component did mount and component will mount methods, there are two methods which I have defined, component will unmount and component did mount. In these two methods, I have set the interval that every second it should show me the time interval, what is the current time interval. And in the render method in the return statement, I have placed this h1 and h2 tags. So now let's come to the another concept, which is Flux. What is Flux in React.js? So let's talk about something called Flux now. So till here, let me repeat once again that we have completed all the 8 React.js fundamentals, which includes JSX, props, component, state, and so on. We have also talked about some lifecycle methods, how to use refs, how to use keys in React.js. Now what is Flux? Now the question which will be coming in your mind is that what is Flux? So Flux is a pattern for managing the data flow in your application, as simple as that. So what I can say is that there are data patterns through which you can manage the data flow in your application. Flux is one of them. So the most important concept of React.js, or you can say in data flow, that in React.js, the data flow is unidirectional. By that, what I mean is that data flow only in one direction. So that is the use of Flux. Before deep dive into this Flux, I want to show you one website from where you can study if you want to go deep dive into Flux. This is a Facebook site, facebook.github.io/Flux. This is a very good site to learn Flux starting from the basics to the advanced part. So I will recommend that you go through this site, facebook.github.io/Flux. This is the official site from the Facebook on the GitHub. Okay. So again, coming to the PPT. So we talked about Flux. Flux is a pattern for managing data flows in your application. And the most important concept is that data flows only in one direction. Now, what are the different parts or what are the different components in Flux? So Flux has basically four main components. One is the dispatcher, another is the store, another is action, and the view. So we will see this in detail, but before that, this diagram is very important. This is a representation of a data flow in any React.js application. It starts from view. You can see the view over here. Now what view is doing, that view sends action to the dispatcher. Now dispatcher can have n number of actions. N number of actions can work on a single dispatcher. Now the dispatcher sends actions to every store. So what happens that once actions are given to the dispatcher from the view, now dispatcher sends these actions to the store. And then again store sends data to the view. So you can see that this is a unidirectional flow of data in React.js, which starts from view, through actions it goes to dispatcher, and from dispatcher it again goes to store, and from store the output again goes to view. And that is how it works in a unidirectional fashion. Now we will talk about all these different components of a Flux data flow one by one. Now what is dispatcher? Now as you can see in this diagram, that dispatcher is getting acted upon by the actions. So view is sending an action to the dispatcher. So dispatcher receives action and dispatches them to stores that have registered with the dispatcher. Now every store will receive an action. There should be only one singleton dispatcher in each application. This is very important, that in any React.js application, there should be only one singleton dispatcher. Let me explain you through an example. So for example, user types in a title for a to-do and hits enter. So we are talking about a to-do application over here, implemented in Flux and Redux, for example. Now what happens is that user types in title for to-do and then press enter. What happens next? The view captures this event and dispatches an add to-do action containing the title of the to-do. So in the title, you must have written some to-do that I have to do this task, and this task. That becomes the title of the to-do. So what happens is that the view, which is there in your unidirectional data flow, it captures this event and dispatches a to-do action or any kind of action containing the title of the to-do. And then when it dispatches any action, it is received by store. So every store will then receive this action. Please remember, I am saying here every store, and this will come out as a basic difference between the Flux and Redux. So when we will talk about Redux, then we will see that Redux always have a single store. But in case of Flux, Flux can have many stores. So that is why it is written on the screen that every store will then receive this action. So there could be multiple store in a Flux based application. Now what is a store? We are talking about store and store. So what is a store all about? So store is the place what it holds the data of an application. This is the most important thing of any Redux based application in React.js. Store will register within application dispatcher. So store is getting the dispatched action from the dispatcher as an input, or you can say the action is received as an input. Now the data in a store must only be mutated by responding to an action. There should not be any public setters on a store, only getters. So action, store is getting an action via a dispatcher. And then store decides what actions they want to respond to. Every time a store data changes, it must emit a change event. So store then do some processing and then it decides that which actions needs to be responded to. And every time a store data changes, it must emit a change event. There could be or there should be many stores in any application when it comes to Flux. But when we will study Redux, please remember there is only a single source of truth in Redux application. So there should be only one store when it comes to Redux. And then we can see the same example which we were talking about, the to-do application. So a store receives a to-do action via dispatcher. Now it decided it is relevant and adds the to-do to the list of things that needs to be done today. And then the store updates its data and then emits a change event. Now what are actions? In any Flux application, we are talking about actions. Actions are given to the store via a dispatcher. Dispatcher dispatches the action to the store. Now what are actions? So basically, action defines the internal API of your application. What action needs to be taken? They capture the way in which anything might interact with your application. They are the simple objects that have a type field and some data. But when it comes to action, it's very important to understand that action should be semantic and descriptive when it is taking place. They should not describe the implementation detail of that action. So I will say that use delete user rather than breaking it up into delete user ID, clear user data, and so on. So remember that all the store will receive the action, and they can know that they need to clear the data or refresh credential by handling the same delete user action. So instead of longing the names of the actions, you can be very precise while giving any action to the store. Now this is just an action example. So when a user clicks, let's say delete on a completed to-do, a single delete to-do action is dispatched. Because in a to-do application, some of the tasks could be completed and some are pending. So when you click or when any user clicks the delete on a completed to-do, a single delete to-do action is dispatched to the store. Now what are views? So we talked about dispatcher, we talked about store, we talked about actions. Now the last thing which we want to talk about is the flux. In the flux is views. So this is the last component you can say of any flux data flow. Data from the store is displayed in views. So views are the thing which is displayed on or render on the browser, on the DOM. Views can use whatever framework you want. In most example, we are using the React. So when a view uses data from a store, it must also subscribe to change events from that store. So if you remember the diagram which I showed you, from view via action, it goes to dispatcher. From dispatcher, it goes to store, and from store, it again goes to view. So when a view uses the data from a store, because in a store, something has been updated, something has been modified. So when a view uses the data from a store, it must also subscribe to change events from that store. This is very important. And then when the store emits a change, the view can get the new data and re-render it, because it has become the updated data now or the processed data. So that's why we are calling that now from the store, when the data will flow, it will be the new data and which is going to be re-rendered. So if a component ever uses the store and does not subscribe to it, then there is likely a subtle bug waiting to be found. Actions are typically dispatched from views as the user interacts with the parts of the application interface. So please remember, whenever there is a user interaction on the view, so some actions will go to dispatcher, which are dispatched to store, and there will be some processing happening, some state changes happening in the store, which is again moved to the view, and the views will have then the new data which they can re-render on the browser. Okay, so now we will talk about what is Redux in React.js, because we have already talked about that what is the Flux and what are its basic concepts. So let's talk about Redux now. So why we have to use Redux with React.js? As we know that React is only a view part in a MVC model kind of application. So to control the data flow, we use Redux as a data flow architecture. So on the left hand side, you can see that there is an application having multiple components which we talked about. And if we want to flow the data in this particular application, we want Redux. This is the basic use of Redux, you can say. Now in React, we already know that the data flow through the components. And always remember that it follows unidirectional flow of data. That is, data always flows from the parent component to the child component. Now, why we need Redux? So basically, to understand what Redux is, you must first understand that what is a state. We have already talked about state, and we also know that the child components cannot pass the data to its parent component in React.js. So opposite flow from bottom to top, it's not possible. The non-parent components can't communicate with each other. React does not recommend direct component to component communication this way. So if you want to connect from this component to this component, or this component from this component, so this component to component approach or this component to component communication, it does not allowed in React.js, and it is not even recommended to use this kind of approach. So basically, Redux offers a solution of storing all your application state in one place called a store. So here we are talking about two terms, two important terms. One is state and another one is store. So if I talk about state again very quickly, so a stateful React component is a JavaScript ES6 class, which we already know, and every stateful React component carries its own state. So if we have multiple components, then every component holds or carries its own state. In a React component, the state holds up data and component might render such data to the user. Now what is Redux is doing over here? Redux holds up the state within a single location, and that single location is called a store. Now components then dispatch the state changes to the store, not directly to the components. This is very important because, as I mentioned, that Redux holds up the state within a single location which is called store, and then components then dispatch the state changes to the store, not directly to the components. Also, with Redux, the logic for fetching and managing the state, it lives outside the React. Now the basic question is that should I use Redux or not? So using Redux or Flux for state management is totally up to you. Now when components dispatch the state changes to the store and not to the components, now it is responsibility of the store to subscribe to that particular data. Because you see here from the store, the components need to be aware of the state changes so that they can subscribe to the store. Now what is the basic definition of a Redux? So from the Redux website, now what is this Redux website? Let me walk you through the official Redux website. This is a official Redux website, redux.js.org, from where you can learn about the Redux in detail. This is a very good website which every developer follows to learn Redux. Please remember, Redux has no direct relation with React. It has no direct relation with React. You can write Redux apps with React, with Angular, with Ember, with jQuery, or even with vanilla JavaScript. But here we will see that how we can use Redux with React.js. So that said, Redux works especially well with libraries like React because it let you describe UI as a function of the state, and Redux emits state updates in response to actions. And React bindings for separate presentational components from other container components. So we will see what is the definition of Redux. So on the official website, it is written that Redux is a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. Now here we have three important terms. What is predictable, what is a state, and what is container? So let me repeat the definition of Redux from the official website. Redux is a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. Now what is predictable? Predictable means state changes follow the three principles. Now we will talk about what are those three principles. And then there is a term called state. The application's data. What is the state over here? The application's data, including the data related to the UI itself. Now the third important term here is container. So Redux is the container which applies action to the pure reducer functions to return a new state. Finally, Redux has been designed for JavaScript applications. So I will say that what is Redux? Redux is a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. Now how it is different from Flux? Earlier we talked about Flux, that what is Flux, what are its different components. Now we have to see that how it is different from Flux. So while Redux and Flux, they share similar concepts and principles, still there are some differences between Flux and Redux. So Flux differentiates between the dispatcher and store. The reason being, Flux supports multiple stores. Redux limits the application to one store, which means there is only a single source of truth, and which means the store and dispatcher can be combined into one dispatcher store. And this dispatcher store is created by Redux create store function. So there is a predefined function in Redux which is create store function, and it creates this dispatcher store kind of functionality in Redux. So in short, what is a Redux? It is the hottest library as of now for front-end development. It is mostly used for application where state management is required. It is used in JavaScript application where we need state management. Redux is a predictable state container. We already talked about that. It is also written on its official website that Redux is a predictable state container for JavaScript applications. And finally, just for the information that Redux, it is developed by Dan and Andrew in 2015. But let me tell you that it is the hottest library as of now for front-end developers out there. It can be used with any framework, be it React, Angular, Ember, jQuery, or even with vanilla JavaScript. Now, Redux principles. Very, very important that we have to understand what are these Redux principles. So there are three Redux principles which I am going to talk about. First is the single store. As we saw that there is a comparison direct difference between Flux and Redux. Flux allow multiple stores, but Redux allow only single store. State is read-only. This is again one of the principles for using Redux, and change using pure functions only. So in Redux, changes are made using pure functions only. So the first one, let's talk about the first one, single store. So with only React unidirectional data flow, we know that the data flow in one direction only in React.js. So direct communication between the components is not allowed. So what happens generally is that Redux uses a concept called store for storing the application state at one place. If other components want to talk to that store for their state management, then they have to subscribe to that store. Then only they receive the updates from the store itself. So in the diagram, you can see over here that this is a tree showing multiple components. The state is managed in a single source of truth, that is the store. The store is single entity over here. All the components state is stored in the store and they receive the updates from the store itself. Now the second principle of Redux is state is read-only. So we talked about what is the first principle of Redux. First principle of Redux is that it has a single source of truth. It always follows the pattern of Flux only, but all the data flows through a Redux system is in unidirectional manner. All changes to the state comes from actions which are applied to the state, and all actions are then went to into Redux. No part of the system can ever receive data from two sources. This is very, very important here because we are talking about the first principle of Redux in React.js, that there will always be a single store. It cannot have multiple stores, and all the components have to receive the updates or the changes from that particular store only. Now the second principle of Redux. The second principle of Redux says that state is read-only, which means that you can change the state only by triggering an action. So without triggering an action, the state cannot be changed. So you can change the state only by triggering an action, which is an object describing what happened. So some action needs to happen. So in this particular example, you can see there is a bulb, there is no action on it. Now a triggering action has happened on it, and now you can change the state, because you can change the state only by triggering an action on a component, which is an object describing what has been happened. So we talked about single source of truth. We talked about that the state needs to be read-only. So we are saying that state can never be mutated. New states are produced by applying an action to the current state from which a new state object is produced. And many of the times it is the recommended practice that immutable programming techniques needs to be utilized while working with Redux. So basically here we talked about the single store, we talked about state is read-only. So in single store, let me repeat quickly once again, that the state of your application is stored in an object tree within a single store. And this makes it easy to create universal apps, as the state from your server can be serialized and hydrated into the client with no extra coding effort. So there will be always a single state tree, which makes it easier to debug or inspect an application. It also enables you to persist your app's state in development for a faster development cycle. So we already talked about single source of truth. We talked about state is read-only, the second principle of Redux, where we talked about that the only way to change the state is to emit an action, which ensures that neither the view nor the network callbacks, you can say, will ever write directly to the state. Instead, they express an intent to transform the state. And finally, we are talking about the third principle of Redux, that is change using pure functions only. The changes are made with pure functions only. So to specify how the state tree is transformed by action, we write reducers, or you can say pure functions. So pure functions are called reducers, and they are used to indicate how the state has been transformed by the action. So reducers are just pure functions that takes the previous state and an action. So you can say the combination of this action and the combination of the previous state, this is the reducers. They take this previous state and an action and return the next state by using a pure function. This pure function is called a reducer over here. Please remember to return new state object instead of mutating the previous state. You can start with a single reducer, and maybe as your app grows, you can split it off into smaller actions or smaller reducers that will manage the specific part of the state tree. So what we are saying here is that because reducers are just functions, or you can say pure functions, you can control the order in which they are called. You can pass the additional data, or even you can make reusable reducers for common tasks such as pagination. So with respect to reducers, this function or the reducers, the function produces no side effects, and many pure functions can be composed together to process different parts of your state tree. Now, what are the basic components of Redux? So there are 4 components of Redux. First is action, reducer, store, and view. So let's talk about them. First one is action. So plain JavaScript objects which are payloads of information for the store. This is the action. So there is an application, action happens on it, and this action is sent to the store. Reducers. We already talked about that the reducers are the pure functions which specify how the application state changes in response to an action. So for example, this is a reducer, the previous state and the action, it is given to the reducer and it generates a new state. But please remember the things which you should never do inside a reducer. You can say these are the don'ts for using a reducer. You should never mutate its arguments. Never try to mutate the state. Perform side effects like API calls and routing transitions. And do not do in a reducer, you cannot call a non-pure function like data.now or math.random in a reducer. Now the third Redux component is store. Store is an object which brings all the components to work together. It calculates the state changes and then notifies the root reducer about it. So there is a state tree where changes are happening from the application. It is moved to the store, and then it calculates, this store calculates the state changes and then notifies the root reducer about it. So what are the various responsibilities of a store? The most important one, that it is holding the application state. It allows access to a state via getState method. Very important to understand. It registers the listeners via subscribe. So if the components have to subscribe to the store, they have to go via the subscribe way. Now the allowing the states to be updated via dispatch, that is an action. So dispatch always dispatches an action to the store, and then some processing happens in the store and a new update, or you can say updated state, is rendered to the view. Stores also handles the unregistering of listeners via the function returned by subscribe. Now what is view? The last Redux component we are talking about. What is a view? So view helps in displaying the data which is provided by the store. So we talked about that from view via action, the data will flow to a dispatcher. The dispatcher will dispatch an action to the store. Now from store, the new or updated state or updated data will be rendered on the DOM using the view. So basically view helps in displaying the data provided by the store. Now how the data flow in Redux components. Redux architecture is concentrated on a strict unidirectional flow of data, which means that in React.js or Redux components or Redux fundamentals, the data should flow in one direction only. Then in all the application, the data follows the same lifecycle pattern, making the logic of your app more predictable and easier to understand. And it also encourages data normalization to ensure the consistency of the data. Now we will see that how the data flows in Redux components. So you can see that actions, these are the reducers which are working on the store. From store, they have been given to the particular component. Some changes are re-rendered when the store changes. And these are the some of the container, you can say smart containers or dumb containers, to which the data is passed, or you can say new data is passed. Now we will talk about React Router. So this is the last topic of this particular React.js full course video series. And then we will see some of the example related to Redux. Now what is a React Router? So you can say React Router, again it's a library. So you have to first install it using npm install react-router. Once it is installed, a library gets added to your node_modules folder. So React Router is a powerful routing library built on top of React framework. It helps in adding, you can say, new screens and flows to the application very quickly. So for example, in your application, there are multiple pages or multiple hyperlinks. You have to add new screens. So React Router library allows you to do that. The most important thing, you can see the third point over here, that it keeps the URL in sync with data that is being displayed on the web page. So here we are talking about single page applications or developing single page applications with React.js, because routing means that it helps to route from one screen to another screen and the flows to the application very quickly, and also keeps the URL in sync with data that is being displayed on a particular web page. So what are the router advantages in React.js? The first one is that it easily understands the application views. So if you have different views in your application, it very easily understands that. It can restore any state and view with simple URLs. There will be no complex URLs, and it will allow you to create friendly URLs. It handles nested views and resolutions. State can be restored by the user by moving backward and forward. So in any application where there are multiple web pages, you have to move back and forth. You have to maybe move backward and forward. So state needs to be restored on different pages. So router allows you that the state can be restored by the user by moving forward and backward. Then it maintains a standardized structure and behavior, because as I mentioned that here using routing library, we are talking about creating single page applications. And finally, what is the advantage of a router? That while navigating it can do implicit CSS transitions, which means that the CSS remains seamless on your complete application, whether there are multiple web pages or a single web page. So let's go to the Redux demo. We will see Redux demo. So this is the official website of Redux. Now I'm going to show you To-Do application, which is developed using React Redux and Redux library. So we know that Redux bindings for, or you can say React bindings for Redux separate the presentational components from the container components. This is very, very important to understand that what are the presentational components and what are container components when we work with React bindings for Redux. So what is the use of, or what is the, you can say, advantage of this approach? This approach of dividing or separating the presentational components with the container components, it will make your app easier to understand and allow you to more easily reuse the components. So what is the difference basically between the presentational components and the container components? We will see in this particular example. So in this particular example, I am using, you can say, the Redux library, because you can see here the create store method, which is calling always taking the parameter as root reducer. So please remember, in any Redux application, there needs to be a root reducer. And once you have the root reducer, always the store will talk to root reducer only. So if I talk about purpose of presentational and container components, the purpose is that presentational tells me that how the things look, maybe about the markup, HTML, or about the style. And container components means how the things work, where the actual business logic lies, which means data fetching, state management, or you can say state updates. Are the presentational components aware of Redux? I will say no. And container components, obviously, yes. So presentational components, they always, you can say, read the data from props, and the container components, they will subscribe to Redux state. So in this particular example, if I talk about the presentational components, so if I go to the solution structure, I have here a to-do list.js. Now in this to-do list, this is, you can say, to-do list created for a list showing the visible to-dos. So when I will write something over here, I can see the visible to-do, which means all to-dos. I can see the active ones and I can see the completed one. So for example, if I write here Edureka training and I press add to-do, so this is added to my to-do list. If I say Vipul React.js classes and I press enter, then again this to-do has been added to this to-do list. So to-do list here basically is working as a presentational component, or you can say presentational layer. Then I have another, you can say, reducers defined over here. For example, todos.js. So this todo.js is returning me just an array of to-do items with the properties ID, text, and completed. So all these are, you can say, we are talking about the presentational components only. So another thing is that if I have a footer component over here, so footer.js, this is footer component is where we let the user to currently see the visible to-dos. So you can see here that when I entered Edureka training and Vipul React.js classes, this is my footer component where we can let the user to change the currently visible to-do. Now if I talk about app.js, now what is this app.js? This app.js is basically calling add to-do, visible to-do list, and footer components. It is calling the three components. So you can say this is the root component that renders everything else. So whatever is getting rendered as an output on the screen is because of this app.js. So basically I can say that these are all the presentational components. They describe the look and feel, but they don't know from where the data comes from, or how to change the state, or how to change the data. They basically, presentational components, they basically render what is given to them. So if you migrate from Redux to something else, then you will be able to keep all these components exactly the same. They have no dependency on the Redux. Now let's talk about designing the container components. So why we need the container components? So we need container components to connect the presentational components to Redux. So for example, there is a presentational to-do list component. I showed you this to-do list. This is a presentational, you can say, component. Now it needs a container like visible to-do list. So I have a container which is a container component, for example, visible to-do list. So it is showing me all the visible, or you can say it is showing me the visibility of all the to-dos which is there on the screen. So basically the presentational to-do list component, it needs a container like visible to-do list that subscribe to the Redux store. And once we subscribe to the, you can say, Redux store and knows how to apply the current visibility filter. To change the visibility filter, we can have a filter link component, or you can say filter link container component that renders the link that dispatches an appropriate, you can say, action. I have implemented an on-click action over here. So it dispatches an appropriate action on click. So if I talk about this visible to-do list.js, if you see in this particular example, I'm just defining the multiple cases. So in this particular visible to-do list.js, I am filtering the to-dos according to the current visibility filter and renders a to-do list. In filter link.js, I am getting the current visibility filter and renders a link. So how about designing the other components? So we talked about, let's say, presentational components, and then we talked about, let's say, container components. Now I will tell you that how you can design the other components as well. So here in this, I have add todo.js container, because sometimes it's very hard to tell if some component should be a presentational component or a container component. For example, maybe sometimes form and functions are really coupled together, such as in the case of maybe this particular small example. So add to do. This add to do is again a component. It's an input field. You can say this is just an input field with a add button. Technically speaking, I can split it probably into two components, but it might be too early at this stage. It's fine to mix presentation and logic in a component that is very small, because this is just a text box and just a, you can say, button. So you can see over here that I have taken the input type, which is of a type text, and then a button of type submit having the text add to do. So it sometimes happens that you don't have to differentiate the presentational and container component. Sometimes you can combine the two logic into one single component, just like this. Now we'll see the functionality that, let's say, this is complete, and if I click on active to-dos, it is showing me the active one. Completed, it is showing me the completed one, and if I click on all, it is showing me all the to-dos over here. So let's say if I write React routers and click on add to do, now I have 3 to-dos in my list, which is showing me the all list. If I want to see the active, I can see the active ones. If I want to see my complete to-dos, I can click on the completed one. Now let's talk about one more example, that how we can use the Redux concept of actions, reducers, and store with React.js. So this is just another example having the same architecture of the solution, wherein I have some components, which is counter.js and counterspec.js, specification.js. Then there are some reducers defined here, index.js. I want to increment and decrement functionality I want to implement. And then I want to increment that if this number is odd, and there is some async functionality which has been implemented over here. So let me show you the output. So if I click on this one, so this shows increment by 1 because I'm returning the state plus 1 every time. And when I click on this minus sign, which is decrementing, so I am deducting it always from 1 always from the state. So when I click plus, it is incrementing, and when I click on the minus button, it is decrementing. Now you see here I have implemented two more functionalities. One is increment if it is odd. If this number is particularly odd, I can click on this and increment. Now it is not incrementing because this number has become even. At the same time, we can also implement async callbacks or asynchronous kind of functionalities in Redux with React.js. So if I click on this increment async, it will take some fraction of seconds to increment. You can see 4 has become the 5 now. So that's all about Redux. So let's go back to the PPT, and this is the final slide, demo. So I will show you a demo very quickly of how you can create a calculator kind of application in React.js. So in this application, we already know that we have to call React DOM.render and app will be my root component. So let's go to app.js. In this app.js, you can see that I have made this code very simple. The reason being that it's a very good practice while working with React.js or any application to divide your code into multiple components. I could have written it on a single file, on a single component. That's not a problem at all. But for code modularity, it's always recommended, and I also recommend that divide your code into multiple components. So as you can see here, app is my parent component. Then I have two subcomponents. One is info about app. So in the components folder, on the left hand side, you can see I have a components folder. In components folder, I have two subcomponents, calculator.js and info about app.js. So first component, or you can say subcomponent within the app in a tree, is info about app, and another subcomponent is calculator. But please remember that once the output will be rendered on the screen, it will be rendered in a specified order in which the components are written, or maybe the components are called. So for example, first component which will be called will be info about app. So let's talk about info about app first. In this info about app, I have written just a static text and an anchor tag. I am showing you a calculator application which is built using React.js. So info about app, it's class info about app extends component. It's a render method which is implemented for this class and a return statement. Simple JSX or HTML I have written in info about app. Now what is the other component which is called after that? The other component which is called after that is calculator. Now what is happening in this calculator? This is something very important because the complete business logic is written in this calculator subcomponent. So let's go to the calculator subcomponent. Now as you can see that in the calculator subcomponent, I have implemented the complete logic. Now this calculator subcomponent will start from class calculator extends component. It will start from here. Now in this, what it is doing is that since it's a ESX standard, or you can say class component, it will add the constructor and the super, and here we are initializing the state with some of the properties. So what all properties are mentioned over here: display value, operator, waiting for operand, first operand, and clear all, and some with default values. Once this is done, I can bind a handle click event, or you can say event handler. It should be done in the constructor. So this is very well done in the constructor itself. Now there are some methods which are defined over here. For example, process digit, process operator. All these methods or functions are doing some kind of operations, mathematical operations on the numbers, because here we are talking about a demo of a calculator application. Now the most important thing which I want to show you is this handle click, because this is binded in the constructor. In this handle click, what I'm doing is that I'm calling a function this.process new key e.target.value. e.target.value is the value which is entered, which will be entered by the user on the calculator application. Now the render method. In the render method, you can see that again in the calculator subcomponent, a subcomponent is called, which is called calculator display. Now calculator display is another component, but in the render method, you can see the complete HTML is written to show you the fields, or you can see the controls on the calculator. A complete, you can say complete HTML is written, and on that on click events are binded. So if I go to this calculator display component, because that is a sub component of the calculator component, this is a function component which has been created, calculator display, which is props is passed over here, and some kind of calculations, normal mathematical operational calculations has been done. So let's run this particular code. So we already know that to run any React.js application, what you have to do, that you have to write npm start. I have pressed enter, and now what will happen, that it will open on the local host on you can say default port number, for example 3000. All the create React app application, they run on 3000 port number, and let's see what will be the output. Great. So this is the output which is shown, which is a calculator kind of functionality developed using React.js. Now we will see that how we have divided our application. So I will go to app.js. In this app.js, the first component was info about app. Now in this info about app, what was written, that it's a calculator built with React.js. So you can see in the output that it is written calculator built with React.js, some you can say static text. So this complete thing, the top thing, defines the info about app component. As simple as that. Now if I talk about this particular component in React.js, this has been particularly developed using calculator.js component. Why I am saying you this, the reason being that please remember that always you have to divide your UI into different components in React.js. This is the basic fundamental of any React.js application, and the same has been applied over here, that the upper one was a static text or maybe any other functionality. So this is divided into one of the component, and the other functionality, which is a calculate kind of functionality, has been implemented using another component, which is calculate.js. Now if I do some basic operations in this calculator, you can see that it is giving me the correct output. So these are basically some of the on-click events. So if I go to the code and go to calculator.js, in the render method, you can see that in the render method there are some button value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. These values are defined over here, which are you can say the digit keys. Then you have the operator keys. What are the operator keys? These are your operator keys. The 4 operator keys has been defined along with the equal to. So this particular component is again rendered using this HTML, but for every control over there on the calculator screen, an on-click event is defined. This is very important, and every time whenever this control or keys will be clicked on the calculator, the handle click function, this is the handle click event which is binded to the constructor initially, this will be called every time. So if I go to the screen, if I want to, let's say, perform more operations, maybe 7 minus 4 and equals, it's 3. Great. So that is how you can implement small applications in React.js. Even you can implement very big applications in React.js using the advanced concepts of React, that is Flux, Redux, routing, and so on. So very quickly, let me show you one more example. The same calculator example I want to show you, but the UI is totally different and based on different component methodology. So let me close this, and I am opening another demo. Okay, so let's open this in Visual Studio Code. And before explaining this particular code piece, this is another kind of, you can say, calculator functionality which has been developed. I want to show you the output of this particular application. So for that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say npm start. Okay. Okay. So it's in another folder. So now I will say npm start. Now, this is the last demo of this particular React.js Edureka series. Now, what I want to show you here is that in the previous example, we saw a calculator application, and this is just another application which is implementing the same functionality, a calculator kind of functionality, but there is a lot many difference in the UI. So you see this is again a calculator which is built on top of React.js libraries, and other libraries have been used over here. And the same functionality, let's say for example, I want to do 5 into 5, it is giving me the output, same operational output. Now if I go to the code and we'll start with index.js, the root component is obviously its app. Now if I go to the component and go to app.js, now this is very important to understand what we are doing. Now what we are doing over here is that I have created a class component, and two subcomponents are defined in this particular component, which is display and button panel. Now for display, if I go to display.js, in display.js what I'm doing is that I'm just defining the props and taking the value of the props. And if I go to button panel.js, now in the class button panel, I have defined the various buttons. You can see over here, the various buttons are defined. But if I talk about the logic, you can say container components, because those were the presentational components. If I talk about the container components has complete logic in calculate.js, because we need to perform the mathematical operations when it comes to any calculator kind of thing. So that is why the complete logic is divided into another folder in calculate.js, where we are doing the operations for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and percentage, and all other operations related to a calculator kind of functionality. So that's why this has been divided into different components: is number.js, operate.js, and calculate.js. So in the previous example, what we did was that we wrote the complete code, complete operational code of a calculator in one file, that was calculate.js. That was the one way of writing the code. But the another way of writing the code is this particular example, where even a small piece of code, if this is a very small piece of code where I'm just checking some if conditions, it could have been written into another component file. But I have created a separate file for it to maintain the code modularity. And that is how you have to learn React.js. So that's all from my side. I have shown you the calculator demo. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!